The grand hall of Oakwood Manor shimmered under the soft glow of 100 candles. Their light danced across gilded frames and polished marble, reflecting off the crystal glasses held by the assembled guests. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive port, hummed with a polite, continuous murmur. For Eleanor Vance, however, the opulent setting felt less like a home and more like a carefully constructed stage. She stood near a vast window, the heavy velvet drapes muffling the chill of the evening. Her plain dark dress, though meticulously clean, faded into the background against the vibrant silks and brocades of the other women. A familiar ache settled deep in her chest. This was her father's home, a place once alive with his booming laughter and quiet wisdom. Now it was merely a backdrop for her stepmother's relentless performance. Eleanor's fingers locked around the stem of her glass, the coolness of the crystal offering a small, grounding sensation. Her eyes, usually downcast, flickered across the room. She noticed the new set of draperies in the drawing room, a lavish crimson silk that must have cost a fortune. Her mind, almost without conscious effort, began to tally the expense. It added to the already considerable sum she had silently accrued from overheard snippets of conversation over the past weeks. She heard Lady Beatrice's confident laugh from across the room, a sound that always grated on Eleanor's nerves. It was a laugh that promised grace but delivered only calculation. Lady Beatrice Vance was a vision in emerald green, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her piercing blue eyes sparkling with an almost predatory charm. She moved through the throng like a queen among her subjects, drawing admiring glances and hushed compliments. Her path inevitably led her closer to Eleanor, a trajectory as predictable as the rising sun. Eleanor felt her breath catch, a tiny, involuntary flinch she quickly suppressed. She had learned long ago that any visible reaction only fueled her stepmother's cruel amusement. "Eleanor, dear, there you are," Lady Beatrice purred, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of a small, curious circle of ladies and gentlemen. Her smile was wide, but it never quite reached her eyes. "Still lost in your own little world, I see. Such a thoughtful child." The words were ostensibly affectionate, yet they landed like small, sharp pebbles. Eleanor offered a tight, polite smile in return, a practiced mask. She could feel the subtle shift in the air, the polite, veiled curiosity of the onlookers. They knew the unspoken hierarchy of Oakwood Manor. Lady Beatrice turned to the group, her gaze sweeping them with a theatrical sigh. "Our Eleanor is truly unique, not one for the bustling affairs of society. Are you, my dear? She prefers her quiet corners, far from all this intellectual conversation." Her hand fluttered delicately in the air, dismissing Eleanor's very presence. Eleanor felt a hot flush creep up her neck. The implication was clear. She was simple, incapable of engaging with anything beyond the most rudimentary thoughts. Her heart tightened, but her mind, stubbornly independent, kept its own counsel. She remembered her father, his hand gently guiding hers over ledgers in the hidden study, the scent of pipe tobacco and old paper filling the small room. He had taught her numbers, not as dry figures, but as the very pulse of an estate. A gentleman in the group, a portly man named Mr. Finch, chuckled obligingly. "Indeed, Lady Beatrice, not every young lady has a head for such things. Perhaps a charming distraction is sometimes better." Eleanor felt a wave of cold despair wash over her. This was her inheritance, her birthright, being slowly eroded by her stepmother's calculated public dismantling of her character. She imagined her father's ledger, its worn leather cover, the precise, elegant script inside. It was a world of order and logic, far removed from this chaotic, superficial charade. Lord Alistair Blackwood, a man of 57 years with silver hair and keen gray eyes, stood at the periphery of the gathering. He had been quietly observing the scene unfold, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His gaze, unblinking and discerning, had first settled on Lady Beatrice, noting the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw even as she smiled. Then his attention shifted to Eleanor. He saw the way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly on her glass, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the momentary flicker of pain in her dark eyes before it was swiftly veiled. He noticed her simple braid, the single locket at her throat, a stark contrast to the glittering jewels of the other women. This was not the vacant stare of a simpleton, he mused. This was the quiet dignity of someone enduring. Lady Beatrice, basking in the attention, pressed her point further. We were just discussing the current state of the colonial trade agreements, Eleanor. I suppose such matters are far too taxing for your delicate sensibilities, aren't they? All those dry figures and complicated tariffs. She paused, a patronizing smile fixed on her lips, clearly expecting a meek agreement or a stammering excuse. Eleanor's gaze drifted past her stepmother's face, landing on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. The silk threads, worn in places, told a story of time and careful craftsmanship, much like the precise entries in a well-kept ledger. She knew with absolute certainty the precise impact of the new tariffs on the estate's wool exports last quarter. She knew the projections for the next 2 quarters, too. Her father had taught her to see beyond the surface, to understand the intricate dance of cause and effect in the world of commerce. To admit such knowledge now would be an act of defiance, a direct challenge. It would only provoke a more vicious attack from Lady Beatrice. So Eleanor merely inclined her head, her response a soft, almost inaudible murmur. Indeed, Lady Beatrice, my mind often finds itself wandering. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but it was a necessary shield. The words were a deliberate dismissal of her own intellect, playing directly into the role her stepmother had so carefully crafted for her. She felt the scrutiny of the other guests, a mixture of pity and condescension. It was a familiar burden, one she carried with a quiet, practiced grace. The air grew heavy with the weight of unspoken judgments. Lord Alistair, however, perceived something else entirely. He watched Eleanor's face. He saw not a vacant stare, but a subtle tightening around her mouth, a faint shadow in her eyes that spoke of intelligence deliberately suppressed. He had met many simple women in his life. Their simplicity was often accompanied by a genuine lack of understanding, a wide-eyed confusion. Eleanor's quietness, her almost imperceptible withdrawal, suggested something far more complex. It hinted at a mind too sharp to be easily dismissed, a spirit too proud to openly break. He wondered what secrets lay behind that composed, almost fragile facade. The conversation shifted, the cluster of guests moving on to lighter topics, leaving Eleanor momentarily untouched. She took a deep, steadying breath. The scent of roasted pheasant drifted from the dining hall, signaling that dinner would soon be served. Her stomach fluttered, not with hunger, but with a familiar anxiety. Mealtimes were often another opportunity for Lady Beatrice to display her cruelty, albeit in more subtle ways. Eleanor's eyes scanned the room once more, almost instinctively searching for familiar faces, for a hint of warmth. There was none. Only the cold, polished surfaces of her ancestral home, now dominated by her stepmother's calculated elegance. She thought of the hidden study, tucked away in a less trafficked wing of Oakwood Manor. It was a small, unassuming room that smelled faintly of old paper, leather, and her father's pipe tobacco. Shelves lined with ledgers and maps, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light from its single leaded window. That was where her true self resided. That was where her father had taught her not only to read and write, but to understand the intricate workings of a vast estate. He had trusted her with his knowledge, his legacy. It was a bond that Lady Beatrice, with all her social maneuvering, could never hope to sever. Lady Beatrice, having concluded her circuit of the room, drifted back towards Eleanor. Her smile, if possible, became even more saccharine. Eleanor, dear, I do believe you are looking a touch pale tonight. All this excitement must be quite overwhelming for you. Her voice was laced with an artificial concern that grated on Eleanor's ears. Perhaps you should go and check on the arrangements in the pantry. Make sure everything is in order for the ladies' dessert course. You always were so good with those simple domestic duties. The words hung in the air, a polite dismissal wrapped in a layer of feigned care. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her, cold and heavy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her fingers tightened once more around the stem of her glass, threatening to snap it. To be relegated to the pantry, like a housemaid, in her own home, in front of such company, was a calculated insult. It reinforced the narrative of her incompetence, her lack of place among the gentry. Yet she knew better than to argue. A quiet retreat was her only recourse. She would not give Lady Beatrice the satisfaction of a public display of emotion. Eleanor curtsied shallowly, her gaze fixed on a point just past her stepmother's shoulder. "As you wish, Lady Beatrice." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it held a faint echo of steel, a hidden resilience that few ever perceived. She turned, her movement slow and deliberate, and began to walk towards the arched doorway leading to the service corridors. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the unspoken weight of her life at Oakwood. The grand hall, with its glittering lights and hushed conversations, receded behind her. She could feel the lingering gaze of the guests, their silent judgments following her retreating form. Lord Alistair Blackwood watched her go. His gray eyes, usually impassive, narrowed slightly. He saw the faint tremble in Eleanor's shoulders, the almost imperceptible slump of her posture once she was out of Lady Beatrice's direct line of sight. He had observed the entire exchange, the subtle cruelty, the quiet endurance. There was something in that young woman, a spark of something significant, that Lady Beatrice clearly intended to extinguish. He took a slow sip of his drink, the amber liquid warm on his tongue. A flicker of an idea, faint but persistent, began to kindling in his mind. He recognized a kindred spirit in the shadows, a hidden strength waiting to be seen. The grand hall of Oakwood Manor shimmered under the soft glow of 100 candles. Their light danced across gilded frames and polished marble, reflecting off the crystal glasses held by the assembled guests. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and expensive port, hummed with a polite, continuous murmur. For Eleanor Vance, however, the opulent setting felt less like a home and more like a carefully constructed stage. She stood near a vast window, the heavy velvet drapes muffling the chill of the evening. Her plain, dark dress, though meticulously clean, faded into the background against the vibrant silks and brocades of the other women. A familiar ache settled deep in her chest. This was her father's home, a place once alive with his booming laughter and quiet wisdom. Now it was merely a backdrop for her stepmother's relentless performance. Eleanor's fingers locked around the stem of her glass, the coolness of the crystal offering a small, grounding sensation. Her eyes, usually downcast, flickered across the room. She noticed the new set of draperies in the drawing room, a lavish crimson silk that must have cost a fortune. Her mind, almost without conscious effort, began to tally the expense. It added to the already considerable sum she had silently accrued from overheard snippets of conversation over the past weeks. She heard Lady Beatrice's confident laugh from across the room, a sound that always grated on Eleanor's nerves. It was a laugh that promised grace but delivered only calculation. Lady Beatrice Vance was a vision in emerald green, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her piercing blue eyes sparkling with an almost predatory charm. She moved through the throng like a queen among her subjects, drawing admiring glances and hushed compliments. Her path inevitably led her closer to Eleanor, a trajectory as predictable as the rising sun. Eleanor felt her breath catch, a tiny, involuntary flinch she quickly suppressed. She had learned long ago that any visible reaction only fueled her stepmother's cruel amusement. "Eleanor, dear, there you are," Lady Beatrice purred, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of a small, curious circle of ladies and gentlemen. Her smile was wide, but it never quite reached her eyes. "Still lost in your own little world, I see. Such a thoughtful child." The words were ostensibly affectionate, yet they landed like small, sharp pebbles. Eleanor offered a tight, polite smile in return, a practiced mask. She could feel the subtle shift in the air, the polite, veiled curiosity of the onlookers. They knew the unspoken hierarchy of Oakwood Manor. Lady Beatrice turned to the group, her gaze sweeping them with a theatrical sigh. "Our Eleanor is truly unique, not one for the bustling affairs of society. Are you, my dear? She prefers her quiet corners, far from all this intellectual conversation." Her hand fluttered delicately in the air, dismissing Eleanor's very presence. Eleanor felt a hot flush creep up her neck. The implication was clear. She was simple, incapable of engaging with anything beyond the most rudimentary thoughts. Her heart tightened, but her mind, stubbornly independent, kept its own counsel. She remembered her father, his hand gently guiding hers over ledgers in the hidden study, the scent of pipe tobacco and old paper filling the small room. He had taught her numbers, not as dry figures, but as the very pulse of an estate. A gentleman in the group, a portly man named Mr. Finch, chuckled obligingly. "Indeed, Lady Beatrice, Not every young lady has a head for such things. Perhaps a charming distraction is sometimes better. Eleanor felt a wave of cold despair wash over her. This was her inheritance, her birthright, being slowly eroded by her stepmother's calculated public dismantling of her character. She imagined her father's ledger, its worn leather cover, the precise, elegant script in 20. It was a world of order and logic, far removed from this chaotic, superficial charade. Lord Alistair Blackwood, a man of 57 years with silver hair and keen gray eyes, stood at the periphery of the gathering. He had been quietly observing the scene unfold, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His gaze, unblinking and discerning, had first settled on Lady Beatrice, noting the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw even as she smiled. Then his attention shifted to Eleanor. He saw the way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly on her glass, the subtle stiffening of her shoulders, the momentary flicker of pain in her dark eyes before it was swiftly veiled. He noticed her simple braid, the single locket at her throat, a stark contrast to the glittering jewels of the other women. This was not the vacant stare of a simpleton, he mused. This was the quiet dignity of someone enduring. Lady Beatrice, basking in the attention, pressed her point further. We were just discussing the current state of the colonial trade agreements, Eleanor. I suppose such matters are far too taxing for your delicate sensibilities, aren't they? All those dry figures and complicated tariffs. She paused, a patronizing smile fixed on her lips, clearly expecting a meek agreement or a stammering excuse. Eleanor's gaze drifted past her stepmother's face, landing on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. The silk threads, worn in places, told a story of time and careful craftsmanship, much like the precise entries in a well-kept ledger. She knew with absolute certainty the precise impact of the new tariffs on the estate's wool exports last quarter. She knew the projections for the next 2 quarters too. Her father had taught her to see beyond the surface, to understand the intricate dance of cause and effect in the world of commerce. To admit such knowledge now would be an act of defiance, a direct challenge. It would only provoke a more vicious attack from Lady Beatrice. So Eleanor merely inclined her head, her response a soft, almost inaudible murmur. Indeed, Lady Beatrice, my mind often finds itself wandering. The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but it was a necessary shield. The words were a deliberate dismissal of her own intellect, playing directly into the role her stepmother had so carefully crafted for her. She felt the scrutiny of the other guests, a mixture of pity and condescension. It was a familiar burden, one she carried with a quiet, practiced grace. The air grew heavy with the weight of unspoken judgments. Lord Alistair, however, perceived something else entirely. He watched Eleanor's face. He saw not a vacant stare, but a subtle tightening around her mouth, a faint shadow in her eyes that spoke of intelligence deliberately suppressed. He had met many simple women in his life. Their simplicity was often accompanied by a genuine lack of understanding, a wide-eyed confusion. Eleanor's quietness, her almost imperceptible withdrawal, suggested something far more complex. It hinted at a mind too sharp to be easily dismissed, a spirit too proud to openly break. He wondered what secrets lay behind that composed, almost fragile facade. The conversation shifted, the cluster of guests moving on to lighter topics, leaving Eleanor momentarily untouched. She took a deep, steadying breath. The scent of roasted pheasant drifted from the dining hall, signaling that dinner would soon be served. Her stomach fluttered, not with hunger, but with a familiar anxiety. Mealtimes were often another opportunity for Lady Beatrice to display her cruelty, albeit in more subtle ways. Eleanor's eyes scanned the room once more, almost instinctively searching for familiar faces, for a hint of warmth. There was none. Only the cold, polished surfaces of her ancestral home, now dominated by her stepmother's calculated elegance. She thought of the hidden study tucked away in a less trafficked wing of Oakwood Manor. It was a small, unassuming room that smelled faintly of old paper, leather, and her father's pipe tobacco. Shelves lined with ledgers and maps, dust motes dancing in the slivers of light from its single leaded window. That was where her true self resided. That was where her father had taught her not only to read and write, but to understand the intricate workings of a vast estate. He had trusted her with his knowledge, his legacy. It was a bond that Lady Beatrice, with all her social maneuvering, could never hope to sever. Lady Beatrice, having concluded her circuit of the room, drifted back towards Eleanor. Her smile, if possible, became even more saccharine. "Eleanor, dear, I do believe you are looking a touch pale tonight. All this excitement must be quite overwhelming for you." Her voice was laced with an artificial concern that grated on Eleanor's ears. "Perhaps you should go and check on the arrangements in the pantry. Make sure everything is in order for the ladies' dessert course. You always were so good with those simple domestic duties." The words hung in the air, a polite dismissal wrapped in a layer of feigned care. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of humiliation wash over her, cold and heavy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her fingers tightened once more around the stem of her glass, threatening to snap it. To be relegated to the pantry like a housemaid in her own home, in front of such company, was a calculated insult. It reinforced the narrative of her incompetence, her lack of place among the gentry. Yet, she knew better than to argue. A quiet retreat was her only recourse. She would not give Lady Beatrice the satisfaction of a public display of emotion. Eleanor curtsied shallowly, her gaze fixed on a point just past her stepmother's shoulder. "As you wish, Lady Beatrice." Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it held a faint echo of steel, a hidden resilience that few ever perceived. She turned, her movements slow and deliberate, and began to walk towards the arched doorway leading to the service corridors. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the unspoken weight of her life at Oakwood. The grand hall, with its glittering lights and hushed conversations, receded behind her. She could feel the lingering gaze of the guests, their silent judgments, following her retreating form. Lord Alistair Blackwood watched her go. His gray eyes, usually impassive, narrowed slightly. He saw the faint tremble in Eleanor's shoulders, the almost imperceptible slump of her posture once she was out of Lady Beatrice's direct line of sight. He had observed the entire exchange, the subtle cruelty, the quiet endurance. There was something in that young woman, a spark of something significant that Lady Beatrice clearly intended to extinguish. He took a slow sip of his drink, the amber liquid warm on his tongue. A flicker of an idea, faint but persistent, began to kindling in his mind. He recognized a kindred spirit in the shadows, a hidden strength waiting to be seen. The chilling echo of Lady Beatrice's dismissive words still lingered in the air of the grand hall. Eleanor, her shoulders slightly stooped, felt every step she took away from the opulent gathering as an affirmation of her insignificance. The rich scent of expensive perfumes mingled with the cloying aroma of the evening's elaborate dinner seemed to follow her, a heavy shroud of public scorn. She retreated to the colder, less frequented quarters of Oakwood Manor, the tapestries on the walls appearing to absorb the last vestiges of warmth and welcome. The silence was not a comfort, but a vast, empty space where her thoughts could magnify the fresh sting of humiliation. Days turned into a suffocating routine of subtle indignities. Lady Beatrice, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and sharp blue eyes, moved through the manor like a predator, her gaze often resting on Eleanor with an unnerving calculation. One afternoon, a summons arrived, not from Lady Beatrice directly, but from a stern-faced footman who led Eleanor to the smaller drawing room. The room, usually reserved for intimate tea, felt heavy with unspoken purpose. Seated beside Lady Beatrice was a man Eleanor had seen at various social functions, a Mr. Finch. He was older, his face a roadmap of indulgence, and his laugh, Eleanor remembered, was a braying sound that scraped against her nerves. Lady Beatrice offered a saccharine smile, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that Eleanor had learned to dread. "Eleanor, my dear, please join us. Mr. Finch has come with a most advantageous proposal." Eleanor felt a sudden coldness seep into her bones, a premonition of something deeply unpleasant. She lowered herself onto a delicate armchair, the velvet scratching at her bare arm. Mr. Finch smiled, a wide, moist grin that did not reach his small, piggy eyes. He adjusted his waistcoat, the movement making the already stuffy room feel even more confined. "Indeed, Miss Vance," Mr. Finch boomed, his voice thick with a self-satisfaction that made Eleanor's stomach clench. "Your stepmother and I have been discussing your future. A young lady of your delicate constitution requires a strong hand, a secure position in society." Eleanor's gaze flickered to Lady Beatrice, whose expression remained fixed in a mask of benevolent concern. It was a familiar performance, designed to outwardly convey care while inwardly inflicting maximum damage. The air in the room felt impossibly heavy, laden with the floral scent of Lady Beatrice's perfume and the stale tobacco of Mr. Finch's breath. Lady Beatrice interlaced her fingers, her rings glittering under the afternoon light. "Eleanor, my dear, we both know that you are not suited for the rigors of managing an estate, nor for the complexities of fashionable society. Your quiet nature, while charming in its cabinet, does not lend itself to such demanding roles." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She knew these words by heart, a well-rehearsed litany meant to chip away at her very soul. She looked at the pattern on the Persian rug, counting the intricate loops, anything to avoid Mr. Finch's leering gaze. "Mr. Finch, a man of considerable means and excellent standing," Lady Beatrice continued, her voice rising slightly in pitch, "has graciously offered you his hand in marriage. It is, I assure you, for your own good. A stable future, a husband to provide for you, and a home far removed from the pressures of Oakwood." The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to Eleanor's spirit. A home far removed from the pressures of Oakwood. The true meaning was clear. A home far removed from your inheritance. A home where you can be controlled, forgotten. Eleanor felt a tremor run through her. Her fingers locked around the delicate porcelain teacup that sat on the small table beside her. She knew if she let go, she would surely shatter it. The thought of being bound to Mr. Finch with his crude jokes and grasping eyes sent a wave of nausea through her. She imagined his touch, his presence, and a cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This was not a proposal, it was a sentence. It was a calculated move to strip her of any lingering claim to her father's legacy, to exile her from the only home she had ever known. "What do you say, my dear?" Mr. Finch pressed, leaning forward, his voice a gravelly rumble. He reached a hand towards her, a thick, fleshy hand with manicured nails. Eleanor flinched, pulling back instinctively. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyes narrowing imperceptibly. Eleanor could not speak. The words seemed to lodge in her throat, a dense, painful lump. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Lady Beatrice intervened, her tone hardening. "Eleanor, you must understand. This is a very generous offer. It secures your future away from the estate, where you would only struggle. You are simply not equipped for such responsibilities." She made it sound like a kindness, a benevolent act, rather than a thinly veiled threat. Eleanor felt the familiar ache of loss, a deep yearning for her father's presence. He would never have allowed this. He would have seen through the pretense, recognized the true cruelty behind the words. She managed to stammer, her voice barely a whisper. I need time to consider." It was a feeble protest, but it was all she could muster. Lady Beatrice sighed, a theatrical sound of exasperation. "Of course, my dear, though I advise you not to dither, such opportunities do not wait forever." Mr. Finch chuckled, a sound that made Eleanor's skin crawl. The meeting ended shortly after, leaving Eleanor feeling as though she had just escaped a physical assault, her limbs trembling, her mind reeling. Later that evening, long after the household had settled into its quiet rhythm, Eleanor found herself drawn to the comfort of the hidden study. The grand halls of Oakwood Manor felt emptier and colder than ever, echoing with the unspoken threats of the afternoon. She moved like a shadow through the labyrinthine corridors, her bare feet silent on the worn oriental rugs. The air grew cooler as she ventured further into the less-used wing, the scent of lavender and beeswax giving way to a faint, comforting aroma of old paper and leather. She pushed open the unassuming wooden door, revealing the small, familiar room. Dust motes danced like tiny forgotten stars in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the single-leaded window. The scent of pipe tobacco, though long unused, still clung faintly to the bookshelves, a ghostly whisper of her father's presence. This was her sanctuary, a place where the world of Lady Beatrice and Mr. Finch could not reach her. It was a place steeped in memory, where the quiet wisdom of her father still resonated. Eleanor lit a small oil lamp, its soft glow chasing away the deepest shadows, illuminating the shelves lined with ledgers, maps, and forgotten curiosities. Her fingers trailed over the spines of books, seeking the familiar weight of her father's ledger. It was always there, tucked away on a lower shelf, a silent guardian of his legacy. She pulled it out, feeling the worn, smooth leather cover against her fingertips. The metal clasps, once bright, were now dull with age and countless openings. She sat at the small, sturdy oak desk, the very spot where she had spent countless hours beside her barometer, learning the intricate dance of numbers. The ledger fell open to a random page, revealing his precise, elegant handwriting. Columns of figures, meticulously balanced, filled the page. There were notes in the margins, observations on crop yields, livestock, and market fluctuations. Each entry was a testament to his careful stewardship, his deep understanding of the land and the people who worked it. Eleanor traced the numbers with her finger, her mind already translating them, finding patterns, understanding the story they told. This was a language she understood, a language that spoke of order, logic, and undeniable truth. It was a stark contrast to the deceptive words and veiled intentions that filled her daily life with Lady Beatrice. A familiar ache settled in her chest, a profound longing for her father's steady hand, his comforting presence, his clear-sighted guidance. If only he were here, he would know what to do. He would never allow her to be cast aside, dismissed as incapable. She remembered his quiet pride as she correctly calculated a complex sum, his gentle smile as he explained the intricacies of debits and credits. He had seen her, truly seen her, beyond the quiet exterior. He had recognized her keen mind, her ability to grasp concepts that others found daunting. The ledger was not just a collection of numbers, it was a tangible link to his love, a testament to the secret strength he had nurtured within her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory wash over her, a fleeting moment of warmth in the cold reality of her present. She opened the ledger again, turning to a section on estate expenditures from 5 years prior. Her father's careful notes detailed every outlay, every investment, every profit. She compared it mentally to the snippets of information she had overheard recently, the casual mentions of Lady Beatrice's lavish spending, the increasingly frequent trips to London, the endless stream of new gowns and costly trinkets. A cold certainty began to form in her mind. The estate was not merely neglected, it was being bled dry. The numbers on the page seemed to pulse with a quiet urgency. They were a reminder of her responsibility, a silent plea from her father's memory. She had to protect this, his legacy. But how? How could she, a young woman deemed incapable of even managing a simple household budget, stand against Lady Beatrice's relentless ambition? The question echoed in the quiet study, amplifying her despair, making the task seem insurmountable. The next morning brought no respite. Eleanor found herself navigating the polished hallways, the scent of fresh-cut flowers unable to mask the underlying tension. As she passed the main drawing room, the sound of polite, tinkling laughter spilled out, accompanied by the rustle of silk and the clinking of teacups. She paused, intending to slip past unnoticed, but a voice, Lady Beatrice's voice, carried clearly through the half-open door, stopping her in her tracks. "Oh, my dear Mrs. Albright, you simply must not worry yourself with such matters." Lady Beatrice's tone was light, airy, yet with an underlying current of condescension. "Eleanor, sweet girl, is quite delicate. She means well, of course, but she is utterly incapable of managing a simple household budget, let alone an estate of this size." A ripple of polite murmurs followed, like waves lapping at a shore. Eleanor felt a familiar flush creep up her neck, her cheeks burning despite the chill in the air. "Her father, bless his heart, tried to impart some knowledge, I suppose," Lady Beatrice continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "But she simply does not have the head for it. All those numbers, such a bore for a young lady. Wouldn't you agree?" Another round of murmurs, punctuated by a sympathetic, "Oh, poor dear," from one of the ladies. Eleanor gripped the smooth wood of the doorframe, her knuckles white. Each word was a deliberate stab, designed to wound, to diminish, to publicly reaffirm her perceived inadequacy. She heard Mrs. Albright's voice, a thin, reedy sound. "Indeed, Lady Beatrice, such a shame. One would hope for a Vance to possess a certain acumen. Lady Beatrice's laughter, a brittle, high-pitched sound, followed. Ah, but Eleanor has her charms, I assure you. Perhaps not in the way one might expect from a true heiress, but she is certainly compliant. The word compliant hung in the air, a final humiliating descriptor. Eleanor felt a cold dread creep over her. It was not enough for Lady Beatrice to simply remove her. She had to systematically dismantle her reputation to ensure that no one, not even the most sympathetic acquaintance, would ever consider Eleanor capable of managing her own affairs. This public denigration was a performance, a carefully orchestrated campaign to justify Lady Beatrice's eventual seizure of control. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though every eye in the room had turned to stare at her, judging her, dismissing her. She backed away slowly, silently, her heart pounding in her ears. The gentle murmur of their conversation faded as she retreated down the corridor. But the words, Lady Beatrice's cruel, dismissive words, echoed in her mind. They cemented her despair, reinforcing the image of a helpless, unskilled girl. There seemed to be no way out, no path to reclaim what was rightfully hers, no way to honor her father's trust. The world felt like a vast, unforgiving cage, and Lady Beatrice held the only key. Eleanor wandered aimlessly for a time, her mind a whirlwind of hurt and desperation. The thought of Mr. Finch, the image of Lady Beatrice's triumphant smile, and the crushing weight of her own helplessness pressed down on her. She found herself in a less-used wing, near the formal study that Lady Beatrice rarely occupied, preferring the more frivolous drawing rooms. She heard voices, muffled at first, then growing clearer as she approached a heavy oak door that stood slightly ajar. Curiosity, or perhaps a desperate need to understand the full extent of her predicament, compelled her to pause. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, hidden from view by a large, drooping fern. The voices belonged to Lady Beatrice and unmistakably Mr. Harrison, the family solicitor, a man known for his meticulous, if somewhat dry, legal advice. A faint scent of cigar smoke, unusual for this part of the house, drifted out from the opening. Lady Beatrice's voice, no longer sweet or theatrical, was sharp and devoid of pretense. "And you are certain, Mr. Harrison, once the girl is married, everything will be seamless?" There was a rustle of papers, a soft clink of a pen against glass. Mr. Harrison's voice was measured, precise. "Yes, Lady Beatrice. The terms of the late Mr. Vance's will are quite clear. Should Miss Vance enter into matrimony, her claim to the direct management of the estate is effectively superseded. Her husband would then assume control, but as you and I both know, his interests would be aligned with ours." Eleanor's blood ran cold, superseded. The word felt like a physical blow. She pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her father's will. She had never fully read it, trusting his love and protection. She had only understood that she was the heiress. But this was a loophole, a betrayal. She felt a sickening certainty wash over her. Lady Beatrice chuckled, a low, triumphant sound that sent shivers down Eleanor's spine. "Excellent. And with Mr. Finch, that will be no issue at all. He is quite amenable to suggestion, especially with certain financial incentives." The words were a confirmation of her worst fears, painting a picture of deliberate, calculated treachery. "So, once Eleanor is married off and out of the way," Lady Beatrice continued, her voice brimming with a chilling satisfaction, "full control of the estate will be mine, without any inconvenient interference." The finality of her tone, the sheer ruthlessness in her voice, left Eleanor utterly breathless. Her breath caught in her throat, her lungs refusing to draw air. She felt utterly trapped, the walls of the manor closing in on her, her fate sealed by a half-closed door and the chilling words she had just overheard. Candlelight flickered in the grand dining hall, casting long shadows across polished silver. Lady Beatrice Vance, in emerald silk, presided over the immense table. Her smile, a practiced curve, did not reach her cold blue eyes. This night was her triumph, a lavish display for every prominent family from the neighboring estates. Eleanor sat several places down, a quiet shadow in a simple gray gown. The rich scent of roasted pheasant and fine wine hung heavy, a stark contrast to the hollow ache inside her. Her stomach tightened with each clink of cutlery, each burst of forced laughter. Every gaze felt like a weight, reminding her of her unwelcome presence. Lady Beatrice ensured her placement was visible, yet distant, implying her lower status. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate, tracing patterns on the porcelain. She heard murmurs, polite but cutting remarks about her quiet nature. Every whisper pricked her. Lord Alastair Blackwood, seated to Lady Beatrice's right, watched with clinical detachment. His keen gray eyes missed nothing. He noted the meticulous table, the sterile decor, and Lady Beatrice's theatrical movements. His gaze drifted to Eleanor, a young woman whose delicate features held an air of thoughtfulness. He saw her quiet composure, her slender fingers resting protectively on her lap. Her dark hair, usually braided simply, was gathered loosely tonight. He remembered her quiet dignity from their last encounter. Conversation ebbed and flowed around Eleanor, a tide of pleasantries and whispered gossip. She felt a growing dread. Lady Beatrice had been unusually genial all evening, a warmth Eleanor knew was feigned, deeply unsettling. Such kindness was always a prelude to something cruel. Eleanor's hands felt clammy. She wished for her hidden study, the scent of old paper, the solidity of her father's ledgers. Numbers there told an honest story. Words, especially Lady Beatrice's, were traps. As servants cleared the main course, Lady Beatrice's syrupy, sweet voice cut through the hum. "My dear Eleanor, you have been so quiet this evening. Are you not enjoying the company?" Eleanor flinched, her head snapping up. All eyes converged upon her. A blush stained her cheeks. She forced a small smile. "The company is delightful, Lady Beatrice. I am merely savoring the occasion." Her voice felt thin. Lady Beatrice chuckled, a sound like glass beads rattling. "Such a modest girl, always so humble, is she not, everyone?" Hesitant murmurs rippled through the guests. "But one must always strive for improvement. Learning is a lifelong pursuit." Lady Beatrice signaled a servant. A heavy leather-bound book, pages yellowed, was brought to her. "I was just admiring this fascinating treatise on 18th century agricultural practices. So very enlightening." She paused, her gaze locking onto Eleanor's. "Perhaps, Eleanor, you could favor us with a reading from this delightful volume. It would be an excellent exercise for your literary inclinations." Eleanor's heart gave a sickening lurch. She knew this book. It was dense with archaic language and complex terminology. Lady Beatrice knew Eleanor found such prose challenging, preferring the clean logic of figures. This was no gentle suggestion. It was public execution. Cold dread seeped into her bones. She glanced at the book, then at Lady Beatrice's triumphant smirk. A flicker of defiance sparked within her. She would not give her the satisfaction of outright refusal. "Of course, Lady Beatrice," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite trembling hands. She pushed back her chair. The scrape echoed loudly. As she walked toward the head of the table, past rows of curious, pitying, or amused faces, each step felt heavy. She reached the book, opened to a random page. The words blurred, a jumble of unfamiliar characters. She picked it up. The old leather cover felt rough against her palms. Lord Alastair watched, his expression unreadable. He saw the tension in Eleanor's shoulders, how she squared them before taking the book. He noticed the downturn of her lips, a hint of resignation, but also a resolute glint in her eyes. This was not a girl collapsing. This was a young woman bracing for a blow. He knew Lady Beatrice's reputation for cruel theatrics. This evening felt like a stage and Eleanor, the unwitting performer. Eleanor cleared her throat, the sound small and dry. She tried to focus. The passage described intricate crop rotation methods, using obscure terms and convoluted sentences. She stumbled over the first few words. The judicious application of fallow periods. Her voice wavered, growing softer with each uncertain syllable. The words dissolved into meaningless shapes. Her mind, so adept at financial equations, found no foothold in this dense prose. She felt the collective attention, heavy and suffocating. Guests exchanged glances. A suppressed giggle floated from the end of the table. Humiliation burned, a hot flame in her chest. It was not just the words, it was the deliberate exposure of a perceived inadequacy, a public branding of her as unintelligent. Every eye felt like a judgment, confirming Lady Beatrice's relentless narrative. Her fingers tightened around the heavy book, knuckles white. She wanted to throw it, to scream that numbers spoke a truer language. She thought of her father, his hand guiding hers over ledgers, his pride in her quick understanding. This humiliation felt like a betrayal of his memory. Lady Beatrice leaned forward, a saccharine smile on her face. "Is something the matter, dear? Are the words too challenging for your delicate sensibilities?" Her voice carried just enough feigned concern to make it utterly damning. Eleanor's breath hitched. She looked up, meeting Lady Beatrice's gaze head-on. Triumph in those blue eyes was undeniable. I I apologize, Lady Beatrice," Eleanor managed, her voice barely a whisper. "The subject matter is, indeed, complex." Tears pricked her eyes. She would not let them fall. "Not here. Not now." Lord Alistair's gaze sharpened. He saw the tremor in Eleanor's lower lip, the quick, imperceptible blink holding back tears. He saw something else. Not helplessness, but deep, unyielding strength beneath the quiet embarrassment. Her composure, facing such calculated malice, was remarkable. He had seen many break under less pressure. The girl was wounded, but not broken. He noticed the clenching of her jaw, the slight lift of her chin. A quiet fire burned there, a defiance speaking volumes without words. He wondered what depths lay beneath her quiet exterior. Lady Beatrice's performance was transparent, a crude attempt to diminish an individual she viewed as a threat. "Quite all right, my dear," Lady Beatrice purred, waving a dismissive hand. "Not everyone is blessed with a scholarly mind. Perhaps a lighter endeavor would suit you better. You may return to your seat." The condescension in her tone was a physical blow. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush deeper. She carefully placed the heavy book back on the table. Each movement was deliberate, controlled. She would not stumble. She would simply retreat, preserving what dignity she had left. As Eleanor turned to walk back, a profound ache spread through her chest. It was a familiar pain, the sting of being belittled, of having her capabilities overlooked. The air felt thick with unspoken judgment, yet she kept her back straight. She focused on the cold marble floor, on the steady rhythm of her breathing. She was a ghost in this house, a silent, unwanted fixture. But a ghost could be unseen, unheard, capable of things no one expected. She reached her chair, sinking gratefully into it. Cutlery clattered, conversation resumed, though she knew the scene would fuel whispers for days. Her appetite vanished. The rich food on her plate seemed tasteless. Her heart hammered with shame and simmering resentment. She longed for her room, for her father's ledger, where her mind felt respected, her skills valued. Eleanor kept her eyes downcast, absorbed by patterns on her plate. She still felt Lord Alistair's gaze, a persistent, thoughtful weight. It differed from pitying glances or sneering looks. His felt like an inquiry, a question. The thought brought a strange warmth to her cold chest. Perhaps someone saw more than Lady Beatrice allowed. Perhaps someone saw beyond the clumsy reader, beyond the quiet girl. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced politeness and discomfort. Eleanor barely spoke, offering only monosyllabic answers. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a consequence of Lady Beatrice's cruelty. When dessert cleared, Lady Beatrice, with a triumphant flourish, announced the ladies would withdraw to the drawing room, while gentlemen remained for brandy and cigars. It was her customary signal, a final dismissal for Eleanor, who was expected to disappear. Eleanor rose, her legs stiff. She knew the routine. She would go to the drawing room, perhaps sit by a window with a book she could truly read, or fade into the tapestry until she could politely excuse herself. A profound exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She needed to escape, to breathe freely away from her stepmother's suffocating presence and society's judging eyes. As she followed the ladies toward the door, head bowed, a discreet cough sounded behind her. A young footman, one of the newer, quieter staff, stood there. He held a small folded paper in his gloved hand. His eyes darted nervously to the head of the table, then back to Eleanor. "Miss Eleanor," he whispered, barely audible above the rustle of silk gowns. "A message for you, miss." He quickly pressed the note into her hand, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting moment. Then, with a quick bow, he melted back into the shadows. Eleanor's fingers closed around the folded paper. It was thick, slightly warm from his hand, and surprisingly heavy. A sharp, unexpected jolt coursed through her. Her heart, already frantic, began to pound harder. Who would send her a message and why? Apprehension washed over her. Was this another of Lady Beatrice's cruel jests? Her mind raced, trying to decipher its meaning. Yet, amidst the rising fear, a tiny spark ignited within her. A strange, unfamiliar hope, fragile but persistent, began to flicker. She held the note tightly, its contents a mystery. As she walked toward the drawing room, her next steps uncertain, her future poised on the edge of the unknown. The crisp, folded paper felt cool against Eleanor's palm, a stark contrast to the burning shame that still warmed her cheeks from the dinner table. She clutched the note, its edges slightly damp with the moisture of her apprehension, as she hurried through the shadowed corridors. Each step echoed the thumping of her heart, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the late hour. The scent of polished wood and stale lilies, remnants of Lady Beatrice's lavish evening, seemed to cling to her, a suffocating reminder of her public humiliation. Finally, she reached her small, sparsely furnished room, a sanctuary of quiet neglect tucked away in a less frequented wing of Oakwood Manor. The lock clicked softly as she secured the door, the sound a small victory against the prying eyes and earbuds that seemed to populate every corner of the house. She lit a single candle on her small writing desk, its flame casting dancing shadows that swallowed the faded floral wallpaper. The room, usually a source of comfort, now felt charged with a strange, nervous energy. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, carefully broke the wax seal, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of old parchment in a distant, earthy aroma of pipe tobacco, quite unlike the cloying perfumes of Lady Beatrice, wafted from the paper. Lord Alistair Blackwood's distinctive script, elegant yet firm, greeted her. His words were few, chosen with deliberate care, yet each one resonated with a profound significance. "Miss Vance," the note began, the formal address a gentle balm to her bruised pride. "I observed your remarkable composure this evening. It is a rare quality, one often overlooked. I find myself in a situation requiring such a mind, particularly one with a keen eye for figures. Should you possess the courage for a discreet discussion on this matter, a messenger will await you by the old oak at Blackwood Manor's south gate at midnight tomorrow. Utmost discretion is paramount." Eleanor read the note once, then again, her breath catching in her throat. The words swam before her eyes, a jumble of veiled meanings, yet the underlying message was startlingly clear. A matter of figures, a keen eye. The very skills her stepmother had so cruelly mocked were not only seen but valued. A cold shiver ran down her spine, quickly followed by a sudden, exhilarating warmth that spread through her chest. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Apprehension was the first, a familiar companion. Lady Beatrice's wrath, should she discover such a clandestine meeting, would be formidable. The very thought made Eleanor's stomach clench. What if this was a trap, another cruel trick to expose her further? The manor was a labyrinth of gossip and suspicion, every shadow a potential witness, every servant a potential spy, yet, pushing through the fear, a powerful spark ignited within her, a beacon in the darkness of her despair. It was hope, vibrant and almost overwhelming. For years she had lived in the shadow of her stepmother's disdain, her intelligence dismissed, her abilities scorned. This note from a man as respected and shrewd as Lord Alistair was an acknowledgement, a silent testament to the hidden truth she guarded so fiercely. He had seen beyond the surface, beyond the clumsy performance, into the quiet strength she held within. She thought of her father, his kind eyes, his patient hands guiding hers across the ledgers in the hidden study. He had taught her not just to count, but to understand the rhythm of an estate, the story hidden within numbers, the secrets revealed by a balanced account. He had called her his little accountant, his sharp-eyed scholar. Her father, who had nurtured her true gifts in secret, would have understood this moment. His memory filled her with a potent mix of aching sorrow and renewed purpose. The parchment crinkled softly in her grip as she folded the note carefully, tucking it deep into the pocket of her worn dressing gown. She paced the small room, the scent of the beeswax from the candle mingling with the faint, sweet smell of lavender from her clothes chest. Her mind, usually so burdened by the weight of her circumstances, felt sharpened, focused. This was not just an invitation. It was an opportunity, a chance to prove herself, not just to Lord Alistair, but to the memory of her father and perhaps, most importantly, to herself. But the path was fraught with danger. Escaping Oakwood Manor unnoticed was a feat in itself. Lady Beatrice, with her network of loyal, if not entirely willing servants, maintained a vigilant watch. Eleanor knew their routines, their changing of shifts, the creaks in the floorboards, the temperamental hinges of the various doors. She had observed them for years, an invisible presence in her own home, and now that detailed observation would serve her. She pulled out a crumpled, unused piece of paper from her desk drawer and a stub of charcoal. The candle flickered, casting long, wavering shadows as she began to sketch a rough map of the manor's grounds. Her brow furrowed in concentration. The south gate of Blackwood Manor was several miles away, a considerable distance to cover on foot in the dead of night. She would need a disguise, something plain and dark to melt into the shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of terror and exhilarating defiance. The main entrance was out of the question. The night watchman would be stationed there. The servants' entrance was also too risky, with its constant traffic and the lingering scent of kitchen fires that could attract attention. She traced a line with her finger, remembering a small, rarely used side gate near the old stables, hidden by an overgrown hedge and a cluster of ancient elm trees. It was far from the main house, rarely checked, and the lock was old and stiff. But she knew its secret. Her father, ever the meticulous planner, had shown her all the estate's hidden pathways. Timing was everything. Midnight. That meant leaving Oakwood Manor by 11 o'clock at the very latest to make the journey. The servants retired for the night by 10, save for a skeleton crew of sleepy maids who moved quietly through the upper floors, extinguishing lamps. Lady Beatrice herself would be safely ensconced in her chambers, dreaming of her next social conquest. Eleanor knew the precise moments when the manor was at its most quiet, its most vulnerable. She thought of the clothes she would wear, not her usual drab dresses, which would make her instantly recognizable. She owned a simple, dark cloak, handed down from a distant aunt, which she rarely wore. Its hood would provide excellent cover. Beneath it, a plain dark gown, practical shoes. She would leave nothing to chance. Every detail felt vital, every decision heavy with consequence. A faint, almost imperceptible sound from the corridor outside made her freeze, her hand hovering over the charcoal sketch. Was it a floorboard creaking, a draft, or a soft footstep? Her breath hitched. She waited, motionless, her ears straining in the quiet. Only the persistent chirp of a cricket from beneath her window broke the silence. She let out a slow, shaky breath. Paranoia was a constant companion in this house. She returned to her planning, her focus unwavering. She would need a small amount of money, just enough for an emergency. A few coins, hidden in her shoe perhaps. A simple leather pouch, tied securely to her waist. Her father's locket, always around her neck, would be her only other companion. It was not just an ornament. It was a connection, a source of quiet strength. The hours passed quickly as Eleanor meticulously mapped out her route, anticipating every possible obstacle. She imagined herself slipping through the gardens, past the sleeping stables, her footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The gate would be a challenge, its rusted hinges groaning, but she knew how to oil them silently. Her mind became a fortress of strategy, blocking out the fear, replacing it with a cold, clear determination. The window pane, cool to the touch, reflected her own wide, determined eyes back at her. The moon was a sliver in the velvet sky, offering just enough light to guide her. She practiced silent movements, walking on the balls of her feet, her hand reaching for imaginary doorknobs. The prospect of freedom, even for a few hours, was intoxicating. The thought of someone finally seeing her, truly seeing her, was a profound, almost dizzying sensation. As the first hint of dawn began to paint the sky at a pale gray, Eleanor extinguished her candle. She folded her makeshift map and hid it beneath a loose floorboard near her bed, a secret within a secret. The note from Lord Alistair remained tucked against her heart. She lay on her narrow bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Sleep would not come. Her heart pulsed with a strange new rhythm, a blend of fear and daring, a fierce longing for the recognition that had eluded her for so long. The next day passed in a blur of forced composure. Eleanor performed her duties with an unusual, almost unsettling efficiency, drawing a suspicious glance or two from Lady Beatrice, who seemed to sense a shift in her stepdaughter's demeanor. Eleanor avoided her stepmother's gaze, keeping her own eyes downcast, a familiar habit that now served as a shield. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to echo her impatience, her growing resolve. As evening descended, a thick, damp fog rolled in from the surrounding fields, blanketing Oakwood Manor in a shroud of gray. It was a perfect cover. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through Eleanor. By 10 o'clock, the manor was quiet, save for the distant murmur of the kitchen staff preparing for the morning. Eleanor waited, her heart a frantic bird in her chest, until the last lamp on the upper floor was extinguished. She dressed quickly, silently. The dark gown, the practical shoes, the heavy cloak. She pulled the hood low over her face, obscuring her features in shadow. She checked her pockets for the hidden coins, felt the reassuring weight of her father's locket. Taking one last look at her small, humble room, a symbol of her hidden life, she took a deep, steadying breath. With a final silent prayer, Eleanor unlatched her door, easing it open by inches until it revealed a sliver of the dark corridor. The air was cool and still. She stepped out, a shadow among shadows, her soft footsteps barely disturbing the dust motes dancing in the faint moonlight filtering through a high window. She moved with practiced stealth, a ghost gliding through her own home. She navigated the familiar twists and turns of the back corridors, her senses heightened, every creak and rustle magnified. The old stable gate was ahead, barely visible through the thick fog. A thrill, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins. She reached the gate, its iron cold beneath her gloved fingers. With a gentle push, a soft groan of rusted metal, she slipped through. Eleanor, disguised in a simple dark cloak and hood, slipped out of Oakwood Manor under the cover of darkness, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and daring, heading towards the rendezvous point at Blackwood Manor's secluded gate. The cold air bit at Eleanor's cheeks, tasting of earth and distant wood smoke. Her gloved fingers clenched her cloak. Moonlight traced the path toward Blackwood Manor's secluded gate. Rustling leaves and shifting shadows mirrored her racing heart. She imagined Lady Beatrice's wrath, a searing inferno, if this journey were discovered. Yet a defiant spark flickered within her. A dark shape emerged from the shadows beneath a gnarled oak. Lord Alistair Blackwood stood there, a solitary figure against the stars. Eleanor's breath hitched. This was real. The man who had witnessed her humiliation, who offered this impossible chance, was now before her. He stepped forward, his movements fluid. The scent of pipe tobacco and crisp linen reached her. "Miss Vance," he greeted, his voice a low, resonant murmur. His tone held no judgment, only quiet curiosity. His keen gray eyes seemed to pierce her disguise. Eleanor curtsied awkwardly, her knees weak. "Lord Alistair," she managed, her voice a whisper against her thundering chest. His gaze, not unkind but scrutinizing, weighed her. She stood still, trying to appear composed. Lord Alistair gestured towards a small stone bench tucked in a hedge. "Please sit," he offered, his voice gentle but firm. The stone felt cold beneath her. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap. He settled opposite her, posture straight, hands resting calmly. The stillness stretched, thick with questions. Eleanor heard an owl, a badger. Each sound sharpened her senses, making her aware of her vulnerability. What did he expect from the girl Lady Beatrice called a simpleton? "I confess, Miss Vance," Lord Alistair began, his voice dropping, "I have been observing your situation at Oakwood Manor for some time." His gaze softened, sympathy flickering in his eyes. Eleanor felt a blush rise, the shame of public mockery returning. "Your stepmother, Lady Beatrice, paints a vivid picture of your capabilities," he continued, a dry note in his voice. Eleanor flinched, biting back a retort. The injustice burned within her. He paused, Then his expression shifted, becoming earnest. My own estate, Blackwood Manor, faces a delicate predicament. A matter of figures, you might say. He leaned forward. My accounts, usually managed by Mr. Davies, have fallen into alarming disarray. Eleanor felt a jolt of surprise. Lord Alistair, known for his management, was confessing such a problem? Her mind instinctively pictured ledgers, numbers. A peculiar excitement stirred within her. I have tried to rectify it, he sobbed, but the complexities are unusual. Entries are missing, others are illogical. It requires a fresh pair of eyes, a sharp mind unburdened by preconceptions, and a discreet hand. He paused. I need someone I can trust implicitly, he stated, his voice serious. Someone who understands an estate's delicate balance. Not just figures, but the lives that depend on them. And I need someone who can work without attracting undue attention. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering, full of quiet expectation. Eleanor felt a tremor. This was it. The secret she guarded, her father's legacy, now hung on revelation. Fear warred with longing for validation. Would he believe her? Her father's face flashed in her mind, his patient hands guiding hers. My father, she began, her voice shaky but gaining strength. He taught me things. She met Lord Alistair's gaze directly, a fragile defiance. Not just letters, but numbers. How an estate breathes through its accounts. His small nod gave her courage. He said, Eleanor continued, voice steady, that a ledger was the heart of the estate. Every beat, every flow, every falter was all there if one knew how to read it. She saw a profound understanding in his eyes. It emboldened her. He showed me how to track expenditures, balance books, foresee lean times, plan for abundance, she confessed, words flowing freely now. He taught me his own system, a way of cross-referencing and verifying that was unique. An unspoken energy crackled between them. Lord Alistair leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. Indeed, he mused, a slow smile gracing his lips. A unique system, you say. My father had one too. A true steward understands ink on the page reflects life in the fields. He paused, then his gray eyes twinkled. You speak of understanding figures, Miss Vance, but can you truly interpret them? He reached inside his coat, producing a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it to a page, holding it out. This is a recent entry, timber purchase. Tell me what you see beyond the numbers. Eleanor hesitated, then took the notebook. Her fingers trembled against the worn leather. The page held Lord Alistair's neat handwriting. She scanned the figures, date, vendor, quantity, price. Her mind, a well-oiled machine, processed the information. The quantity is substantial, she observed, her concentration absolute. And the price per unit seems elevated even for fine oak, especially with the recent dip in timber prices from neighboring estates. She looked up, brow furrowed. Unless it's specialized wood or for an urgent project. Lord Alistair watched, his expression unreadable. Eleanor's mind raced. But, she continued, gaining confidence, the vendor, Mr. Silas Thorne, is known for his less than transparent dealings. My father warned against him. She looked at Lord Alistair, eyes wide. And the delivery date, 2 weeks from now, yet payment was full, up front. Highly unusual for such an order, unless there is a significant discount not reflected here. A slow, pleased smile spread across Lord Alistair's face. Remarkable, Miss Vance, he said, admiration in his voice. You have seen not just the numbers, but the shadows they cast. My steward, Mr. Davies, missed these entirely. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the warmth of being seen, understood, appreciated. It was a balm to years of dismissive glances. She handed the notebook back, a quiet triumph in her heart. My father always taught me to look beyond the immediate, Eleanor explained, her voice soft but clear. To ask why a number stood out, why a pattern changed. He said numbers held stories. Her father's patient explanations, the scent of old paper, filled her mind. Lord Alistair tapped the notebook thoughtfully. Indeed, they do. And it seems you speak the same language as your father, a language few truly comprehend. He looked at her, his expression solemn. This situation at Blackwood Manor is complicated. I suspect deliberate manipulation, even theft. I need someone to untangle this web, quietly and thoroughly. Eleanor's heart leaped, then settled nervously. The stakes were high. This was about uncovering deceit, perhaps exposing criminals. Yet the thought of purpose was intoxicating. "Are you willing, Miss Vance," he asked, his voice low, "to undertake this task? A temporary arrangement, confidential. You would have access to my records, my estate office, a quiet room." He watched her, waiting. Eleanor thought of Lady Beatrice's belittling, the marriage proposal she avoided. She thought of her father's pride, his belief in her. This was an opportunity, a chance to prove her worth. "Yes, Lord Alistair," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I will." A profound resolve settled over her, chilling her fear. He nodded slowly, deep satisfaction in his eyes. "Excellent. I had a feeling you would." He reached into his coat, retrieving a larger, heavy volume. It was bound in dark green leather, scuffed. "This," he said, handing it to her, "is the most recent master ledger for general expenditures. The significant discrepancies appear here." Eleanor took the ledger. Its weight was substantial, a symbol of his trust. The leather felt smooth. She could feel the stories within its pages. This was a beginning. "You will come to Blackwood Manor each day, assisting Mr. Davies with archival work," Lord Alistair instructed, his voice crisp. "He is a good man, but easily distracted. He will be told you are merely organizing old documents." A knowing look passed between them. "You will report only to me," he continued, his tone grave. "No one else. This must remain our secret, Miss Vance, for your safety and for the success of this endeavor." His eyes held hers, a silent warning. Risks are involved in uncovering such truths, especially when they touch powerful interests. "Do you understand?" Eleanor met his gaze, her jaw set with quiet determination. She understood. The danger was palpable. So was the promise of justice, purpose, vindication. She clutched the ledger to her chest, a silent pact forged in the darkness. The heavy leather of the ledger felt cool beneath Eleanor's fingertips, its pages smelling faintly of age and pressed ink. She sat at the vast oak desk in Lord Alistair's quiet study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the rows of meticulously bound books. This was a sanctuary, a world away from the cold, echoing halls of Oakwood Manor, a place where her mind could truly breathe. Mr. Davies had shown her to the room, his gruff instructions a stark contrast to the deferential silence that now enveloped her. She traced the elegant script of her late father's hand in her own worn ledger, then turned to the daunting task before her. Lord Alistair's accounts were indeed complex, spanning several years and countless transactions. Eleanor began with the most recent entries, her sharp eyes scanning the neat columns of figures, her mind already calculating, cross-referencing. The scratch of her pen across the paper was the only sound for hours, a steady rhythm against the distant chime of a grandfather clock. She sipped cool water from a crystal glass, the taste refreshing on her tongue as her focus deepened. The air, initially cool and still, grew warmer as the night deepened, a fire crackling softly in the hearth. She found the first discrepancy just after midnight, a payment to a supplier, larger than usual, with no corresponding invoice. Her brow furrowed slightly. It was a minor sum, easily dismissed as an oversight by a less keen eye, but Eleanor's father had taught her that the smallest ripples often hinted at the deepest currents. A shiver ran through her, not of cold, but of the immense responsibility placed upon her. She made a discreet note, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. Days turned into nights, nights into the faint light of dawn. Eleanor's routine became a precise dance of stealth and intense concentration. She would slip away from Oakwood Manor under the pretense of collecting medicinal herbs or visiting a distant relative, her dark cloak a familiar comfort against the biting night air. The journey to Blackwood Manor, though short, was always fraught with the fear of discovery. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, made her breath catch in her throat. Once inside Lord Alistair's study, she lost herself in the numbers. The smooth, polished wood of the desk felt solid beneath her hands, grounding her. She worked through lunch, through supper, often forgetting to eat, sustained only by the thrill of the chase. Mr. Davies would occasionally bring her a tray of tea and biscuits, his usually stern expression softening into one of quiet approval when he saw her deep in thought. The scent of black tea mingled with the scent of old paper, creating a unique aroma that now felt like home. The discrepancies grew in number and size. What began as minor misalignments in payments evolved into recurring, unexplained expenses for phantom repairs and services never rendered. She saw patterns emerging, subtle shifts in spending that suggested deliberate obfuscation rather than simple error. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. This was no mere mismanagement. This was something far more deliberate, far more insidious. The taste of dust in the old books often made her thirsty, but she ignored it, driven by a growing urgency. Across the fields at Oakwood Manor, Lady Beatrice began to notice a change in Eleanor. Her stepdaughter, once so easily cowed, now possessed a subtle, quiet confidence. Eleanor's eyes, though still often downcast, held a spark, a glint of purpose that unnerved Lady Beatrice. She observed Eleanor's more frequent absences, her careful explanations, in the faint, almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke and old leather that sometimes clung to her simple gowns. "Where does the girl go?" Lady Beatrice snapped at one of her most trusted maids, Martha, her voice sharp as glass. Martha, a woman with eyes that missed little, shifted uncomfortably. "She says she walks, my lady, to see the gardens, to visit old Mrs. Gable down the lane." Lady Beatrice scoffed, the sound a dry rustle of silk. "Nonsense. Eleanor never cared for gardens, and Mrs. Gable died last winter. Watch her, Martha, watch her every move." Martha, along with another sharp-eyed footman named Tommen, began to shadow Eleanor. They reported her odd hours, her quiet demeanor upon her return, the way she seemed to vanish and reappear as if by magic. Lady Beatrice's frustration festered, growing into a burning suspicion. She had worked too hard to discredit Eleanor, to paint her as simple and incapable. This newfound independence, this quiet strength, threatened everything. Back in Blackwood Manor, Eleanor meticulously cross-referenced entries from different ledgers, spanning several years. She felt the heavy weight of her father's teachings guiding her, his silent voice in her head, reminding her to look beyond the obvious, to question every entry. The faint warmth from the fire no longer registered. Her entire being was consumed by the intricate puzzle before her. The dry air of the study made her lips chap, but she barely noticed. She discovered a series of large, irregular transfers of funds to an unknown recipient, disguised within a complex web of legitimate expenditures. These transfers were always made through an obscure trading company, one that appeared to exist only on paper. The amounts were substantial, enough to significantly drain an estate, and they spanned years, growing bolder over time. Her hand trembled as she wrote down the details, the metallic tang of the ink sudden and sharp on her tongue. This was no accident. This was a sophisticated long-term embezzlement scheme, cleverly hidden amidst thousands of routine transactions. The scale of it made her dizzy, a cold wave washing over her as she realized the true depth of Lord Alistair's trust in her and the immense danger she now faced. She was no longer just auditing. She was uncovering a crime. The heavy silence of the study seemed to press in on her, holding its breath. Her gaze fell on one particular sequence of numbers, an entry that had been deliberately miscategorized, its true purpose buried deep within a seemingly innocuous column. It represented an enormous sum, far greater than anything she had found before, and it pointed directly to a systematic, almost brazen siphoning of the estate's wealth. The specific details of the transaction, once unraveled, revealed a direct link to what appeared to be a fabricated investment, a shell company she had seen referenced in earlier, smaller discrepancies. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled. The air in the study felt suddenly thin, sharp. This was the heart of the matter, the core of the deception. She had found it. The realization settled over her, chilling her to the bone. She was holding the key to a vast, dark secret, one that could bring down powerful figures. Her fingers locked around the quill, her knuckles white. The weight of her discovery was immense, pressing down on her. The distant chimes of Blackwood Manor's clock announced the very late hour. Eleanor gathered her notes, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she had to leave, to return to Oakwood Manor before the first hint of dawn. The journey back felt longer, the shadows deeper, each rustle of leaves amplified into a threat. Her breath plumed in the cold night air, a fragile cloud against the vast darkness. As she approached the servants' entrance to Oakwood Manor, a dark shape detached itself from the deeper shadows near the old stable. Her eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, made out the figure of Thomas, Lady Beatrice's watchful footman. He stood motionless, a silent sentinel, his form barely visible against the rough stone wall. Eleanor froze, her heart leaping into her throat, a cold dread washing over her. She pulled her cloak tighter, melting back into the ancient oak trees that lined the path, her steps silent on the damp earth. The rough bark scraped against her hand as she pressed herself against the trunk, barely daring to breathe. Thomas remained still for another long moment, then slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the very spot where Eleanor had stood just seconds before. The chill of the night suddenly felt far more profound. Eleanor held her breath, not moving, every muscle tense, the taste of fear sharp and bitter in her mouth. The heavy leather of the ledger felt cool beneath Eleanor's fingertips, its pages smelling faintly of age and pressed ink. She sat at the vast oak desk in Lord Alistair's quiet study, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the rows of meticulously bound books. This was a sanctuary, a world away from the cold, echoing halls of Oakwood Manor, a place where her mind could truly breathe. Mr. Davies had shown her to the room, his gruff instructions a stark contrast to the deferential silence that now enveloped her. She traced the elegant script of her late father's hand in her own worn ledger, then turned to the daunting task before her. Lord Alistair's accounts were indeed complex, spanning several years and countless transactions. Eleanor began with the most recent entries, her sharp eyes scanning the neat columns of figures, her mind already calculating, cross-referencing. The scratch of her pen across the paper was the only sound for hours, a steady rhythm against the distant chime of a grandfather clock. She sipped cool water from a crystal glass, the taste refreshing on her tongue as her focus deepened. The air, initially cool and still, grew warmer as the night deepened, a fire crackling softly in the hearth. She found the first discrepancy just after midnight, a payment to a supplier, larger than usual, with no corresponding invoice. Her brow furrowed slightly. It was a minor sum, easily dismissed as an oversight by a less keen eye, but Eleanor's father had taught her that the smallest ripples often hinted at the deepest currents. A shiver ran through her, not of cold, but of the immense responsibility placed upon her. She made a discreet note, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. Days turned into nights, nights into the faint light of dawn. Eleanor's routine became a precise dance of stealth and intense concentration. She would slip away from Oakwood Manor under the pretense of collecting medicinal herbs or visiting a distant relative, her dark cloak a familiar comfort against the biting night air. The journey to Blackwood Manor, though short, was always fraught with the fear of discovery. Each rustle of leaves, each snapping twig, made her breath catch in her throat. Once inside Lord Alistair's study, she lost herself in the numbers. The smooth, polished wood of the desk felt solid beneath her hands, grounding her. She worked through lunch, through supper, often forgetting to eat, sustained only by the thrill of the chase. Mr. Davies would occasionally bring her a tray of tea and biscuits, his usually stern expression softening into one of quiet approval when he saw her deep in thought. The scent of black tea mingled with the scent of old paper, creating a unique aroma that now felt like home. The discrepancies grew in number and size. What began as minor misalignments in payments evolved into recurring, unexplained expenses for phantom repairs and services never rendered. She saw patterns emerging, subtle shifts in spending that suggested deliberate obfuscation rather than simple error. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. This was no mere mismanagement. This was something far more deliberate, far more insidious. The taste of dust in the old books often made her thirsty, but she ignored it, driven by a growing urgency. Across the fields at Oakwood Manor, Lady Beatrice began to notice a change in Eleanor. Her stepdaughter, once so easily cowed, now possessed a subtle, quiet confidence. Eleanor's eyes, though still often downcast, held a spark, a glint of purpose that unnerved Lady Beatrice. She observed Eleanor's more frequent absences, her careful explanations, and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of wood smoke and old leather that sometimes clung to her simple gowns. "Where does the girl go?" Lady Beatrice snapped at one of her most trusted maids, Martha, her voice sharp as glass. Martha, a woman with eyes that missed little, shifted uncomfortably. "She says she walks, my lady, to see the gardens, to visit old Mrs. Gable down the lane." Lady Beatrice scoffed, the sound a dry rustle of silk. "Nonsense! Eleanor never cared for gardens, and Mrs. Gable died last winter. Watch her, Martha, watch her every move." Martha, along with another sharp-eyed footman named Thomas, began to shadow Eleanor. They reported her odd hours, her quiet demeanor upon her return, the way she seemed to vanish and reappear as if by magic. Lady Beatrice's frustration festered, growing into a burning suspicion. She had worked too hard to discredit Eleanor, to paint her as simple and incapable. This newfound independence, this quiet strength, threatened everything. Back in Blackwood Manor, Eleanor meticulously cross-referenced entries from different ledgers, spanning several years. She felt the heavy weight of her father's teachings guiding her, his silent voice in her head reminding her to look beyond the obvious, to question every entry. The faint warmth from the fire no longer registered. Her entire being was consumed by the intricate puzzle before her. The dry air of the study made her lips chap, but she barely noticed. She discovered a series of large, irregular transfers of funds to an unknown recipient, disguised within a complex web of legitimate expenditures. These transfers were always made through an obscure trading company, one that appeared to exist only on paper. The amounts were substantial, enough to significantly drain an estate, and they spanned years, growing bolder over time. Her hand trembled as she wrote down the details, the metallic tang of the ink sudden and sharp on her tongue. This was no accident. This was a sophisticated long-term embezzlement scheme, cleverly hidden amidst thousands of routine transactions. The scale of it made her dizzy, a cold wave washing over her as she realized the true depth of Lord Alistair's trust in her and the immense danger she now faced. She was no longer just auditing. She was uncovering a crime. The heavy silence of the study seemed to press in on her, holding its breath. Her gaze fell on one particular sequence of numbers, an entry that had been deliberately miscategorized, its true purpose buried deep within a seemingly innocuous column. It represented an enormous sum, far greater than anything she had found before, and it pointed directly to a systematic, almost brazen siphoning of the estate's wealth. The specific details of the transaction, once unraveled, revealed a direct link to what appeared to be a fabricated investment, a shell company she had seen referenced in earlier, smaller discrepancies. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled. The air in the study felt suddenly thin, sharp. This was the heart of the matter, the core of the deception. She had found it. The realization settled over her, chilling her to the bone. She was holding the key to a vast, dark secret, one that could bring down powerful figures. Her fingers locked around the quill, her knuckles white. The weight of her discovery was immense, pressing down on her. The distant chimes of Blackwood Manor's clock announced the very late hour. Eleanor gathered her notes, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she had to leave, to return to Oakwood Manor before the first hint of dawn. The journey back felt longer, the shadows deeper, each rustle of leaves amplified into a threat. Her breath plumed in the cold night air, a fragile cloud against the vast darkness. As she approached the servants' entrance to Oakwood Manor, a dark shape detached itself from the deeper shadows near the old stable. Her eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, made out the figure of Thomas, Lady Beatrice's watchful footman. He stood motionless, a silent sentinel, his form barely visible against the rough stone wall. Eleanor froze, her heart leaping into her throat, a cold dread washing over her. She pulled her cloak tighter, melting back into the ancient oak trees that lined the path, her steps silent on the damp earth. The rough bark scraped against her hand as she pressed herself against the trunk, barely daring to breathe. Thomas remained still for another long moment, then slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the very spot where Eleanor had stood just seconds before. The chill of the night suddenly felt far more profound. Eleanor held her breath, not moving, every muscle tense, the taste of fear sharp and bitter in her mouth. The night air clung to Eleanor's skin, a chill from her hasty return to Oakwood Manor. She had slipped past Lady Beatrice again, her heart thrumming from the near miss. Yet the fear faded, overshadowed by her discoveries. A complex web of deceit now clearly filled her mind. Blackwood Manor's ledgers had spoken, revealing secrets demanding immediate attention. The next morning, Eleanor approached Lord Alistair's study, a briefcase clutched in her hand. The scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco greeted her, a comforting anchor in the quiet room. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, lighting dust motes in the air. This contrasted sharply with the figures she would reveal. Lord Alistair stood by his heavy oak desk, his silver hair catching the light, his keen gray eyes fixed on her. He offered a slight, encouraging nod, sensing the importance of her visit. Eleanor placed the briefcase on the polished surface, her fingers tracing the worn leather. A dry nervousness tightened her throat, but the information's urgency propelled her. She unclasped the case, arranging her prepared notes and ledgered pages. The rustle of papers filled the silent room, a testament to hours of work. She began to speak, her voice soft but steady. She detailed the systematic discrepancies, the disguised transactions, and the alarming pattern of financial drains she had uncovered. Lord Alistair listened intently, his expression unreadable. He picked up a page, his thumb brushing her calculations, then another. He asked probing questions, his voice low and measured, testing her understanding. Eleanor answered each query with clarity. She drew upon her father's teachings and her innate grasp of numbers. She explained how sums were diverted, disguised as legitimate expenses for repairs or supplies that never appeared. She showed him false invoices tucked among genuine ones, their numbers subtly inflated. As she spoke, Eleanor felt a thrill of competence, a sensation long denied. She watched Lord Alistair's face, seeing his eyes shift from cautious observation to profound recognition. A flicker of warmth spread through her, a hopeful flame against the cold indifference she usually faced. He moved around the desk, stopping beside her to point at a column. His proximity sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of unexpected awareness. "Remarkable, Miss Vance," Lord Alistair stated, his voice carrying new respect. He leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms. "Your diligence is exceptional, and your insight is truly rare." He met her gaze. A deep, knowing understanding passed between them. Eleanor's heart gave a small lurch. It was an acknowledgement of her worth. The first time in years she felt truly seen, truly valued for what she was. A comfortable silence settled, broken only by a distant crow. The air felt charged, not with tension, but shared purpose. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. She met his gaze, no longer hesitant. In his eyes she saw not pity, but genuine admiration, a silent camaraderie. It was a connection born of mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. Lord Alistair picked up an ornate paperweight, turning it in his fingers. "These figures suggest deeper deceit than I suspected," he mused, his brow furrowing. "It is not mismanagement. It is a calculated effort to drain the estate." He looked at her again, his gaze steady. "You have laid bare a truth that eluded even my trusted stewards." Eleanor felt a surge of quiet pride, tempered by the chilling implications. The betrayal was widespread. As she considered the fraud within Blackwood Manor's accounts, a cold realization crept into Eleanor's mind. These diversions, inflated invoices, and phantom expenses were not unique. She had seen similar signs at Oakwood Manor. Her father's ledgers always showed a healthy balance, but since Lady Beatrice took control, Eleanor noticed a gradual decline. Paint seemed perpetually chipped. The stable roof always needed repair, yet large sums were allocated for these things. A metallic tang of unease filled her mouth. She remembered cold drafts in Oakwood's corridors, dust on parlor furniture. The house slowly decayed, masked by Lady Beatrice's lavish parties. Her stepmother's spending seemed the primary cause. Now Eleanor wondered if something more sinister was at play, a silent leaching of funds mirroring the schemes she had uncovered. The thought made her stomach clench with chilling dread. Was Lady Beatrice complicit in this? Eleanor's grip tightened on the desk, her knuckles white. Oakwood, slowly bled dry, flashed before her eyes. It was a sickening thought, linking the fate of both houses. She felt anguish, an ache for the heritage she was losing. Blackwood Manor, now a sanctuary, felt like a mirror reflecting the chaos threatening her own home. The pervasive deception sent a shiver down her spine. Miss Vance, Lord Alistair's voice broke her reverie, his tone grave. This scheme is not isolated. These irregularities point to someone who understands my estate intimately. He paused, his gaze fixed on her. Someone trusted. The air grew heavy with unspoken suspicion. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat dry. The conversation shifted from analysis to urgent inquiry. Lord Alistair moved to his liquor cabinet, pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass. His action showed deep thought, a man preparing for a difficult revelation. He turned back to her, his expression resolute. I need you to delve deeper, Miss Vance. Much deeper. His words were a command, delivered with quiet gravity. Find the source, the orchestrator of this betrayal. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. The challenge was immense, fraught with peril. A powerful sense of purpose surged through her. This was about justice, about uncovering truth, not just Blackwood Manor. Her father's legacy, Oakwood's decline, spurred her onward. Risks mounted, but the opportunity to fight for what was right, to prove her worth, was too compelling. Her eyes, usually downcast, held fierce resolve. I suspect the culprit is unexpected, Lord Alistair continued, his voice a low murmur. Someone well-placed, perhaps whose loyalty I never questioned. He looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes piercing, searching for hesitation. Eleanor met his gaze directly, her chin lifting. She felt the weight of his trust, a trust transcending their arrangement. This was a battle against unseen enemies, a quiet war waged with numbers and truth. Will you accept this task, Miss Vance? Lord Alistair asked, his question hanging. The gravity of his words was clear, outlining danger and discretion. Eleanor did not hesitate. Her sharp mind sifted possibilities, drawing connections, formulating strategies. She thought of her father, his integrity, and her inherited strength. A single determined nod was her answer, a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The whispers started, a faint rustle carried on the spring breeze. Eleanor felt their cold touch long before understanding their meaning. Lady Beatrice, her face a public mask of concern, had perfected planting scandal. She spoke of Eleanor's absences, her secrecy, and a mysterious gentleman preying on her stepdaughter. The rumor spread through drawing rooms, leaving averted glances and pitying smiles. At Mrs. Albright's gathering, Eleanor felt the chill first. Ignored no longer, she was scrutinized. Eyes lingered. She felt the unspoken questions. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. She gripped her teacup, wishing to disappear. The air felt heavy with judgment. Back at Oakwood Manor, the silence amplified the gossip's sting. Even servants gave uncertain glances. Eleanor knew Lady Beatrice was behind it. Her stepmother's grand plans had failed. This attack aimed to ruin Eleanor's name, to deny her inheritance, her future. A cold dread settled in Eleanor's chest. At Blackwood Manor, her work continued, a demanding sanctuary. Lord Alistair's ledgers, once clear, now blurred. Concentration wavered, her mind replaying whispers. She pored over figures, aching to banish the thoughts. Injustice burned, a hot flush on her cheeks. Small errors crept in. The pages rustle, usually a comfort, now grated. One afternoon, Mr. Davies, Lord Alistair's steward, spoke to her, his gruff manner softened. He mentioned the whispers, warning of a young lady's fragile reputation. Eleanor thanked him, her voice faint. His words solidified the tightening net around her. She closed her eyes, a sharp pain piercing her temples. The office air felt stale, suffocating. Lord Alistair, observant, saw the shadows under Eleanor's eyes. He noticed her slumped shoulders, the tremor in her hand, the effort to hold her gaze. He heard the gossip from his staff. He knew Lady Beatrice's calculated cruelty aimed to break Eleanor. Deep concern mixed with quiet fury. He could not let this vital work, this woman, be undone. One evening, Lord Alistair stopped Eleanor as she left. He gestured to a discreet, unmarked door she had never seen. His voice was low, warm. Eleanor, he said, I have been watching. This estate requires your focus. You need protection. Your work is too important. Eleanor stood still, his words resonating. She had felt the danger, tried to endure. Lady Beatrice's tactics are cruel, he continued. This fabrication will sever your ties, force you back to her control. He opened the door. A soft glow came from within. This room is old, secure, he explained. It has a private entrance known to few. Mr. Davies prepared it. Eleanor stepped inside, her breath catching. It was small but inviting. A roaring fireplace warmed an armchair. A writing desk sat by a window overlooking an ancient oak. A simple bed, books, and a gentle lamp completed the scene. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax. It felt like a warm embrace. Here, Lord Alistair said softly, you can work without fear. Rest without anxiety. It is private. Only Mr. Davies and I will know. Eleanor turned, her eyes welling. His kindness was overwhelming. Accustomed to scorn, this care felt like a balm. Her throat tightened. She just nodded, a tear falling. This is not charity, Eleanor, he added firmly. It is a necessity. Your work is too important. Your well-being matters. You earned this. He left her. Eleanor ran her hand over the desk. Relief, vast and overwhelming, washed over her, followed by shame. Shame that gossip had shaken her resolve, that she had forgotten her purpose. Days passed in peace and pressure. In her hidden room, Eleanor worked with renewed focus. The light, the fire, the manor's hum were her companions. She traced funds, found dubious transactions, pieced together liabilities. Her mind found clarity. Outside Blackwood Manor, the chill of rumors reasserted itself. Unseen eyes, society's judgment, pressed down. Whispers followed her. Lady Beatrice, emboldened, sent a letter. It expressed concern for Eleanor's moral decline, suggesting a convent was her only option. Eleanor read the letter in her room, hands trembling with fury and despair. The cruel words, moral decline, unfit, convent, struck at her core. Lady Beatrice sought to erase her identity. Eleanor crumpled the letter, her chest aching. She stared out at the ancient oak. The world felt vast, indifferent to her suffering. The burden of her secret, the scrutiny, felt crushing. She was profoundly tired. Her shoulders ached. Her head throbbed. Tears pricked her eyes. She had held them back for so long. Now, in the quiet solitude, the dam broke. Hot, bitter tears flowed freely, tracing paths down her cheeks. A ragged sob escaped. She sank into the armchair, burying her face, letting despair wash over her. Was it worth it? The pain, the humiliation, the loneliness? Perhaps Lady Beatrice was right. Perhaps she should surrender, let her father's legacy crumble. The thought brought a terrifying peace. Her body shook, her breath shallow. Her tear-blurred gaze landed on her father's ledger. It lay on the table, a silent companion. Its worn leather cover, the faded title, seemed to call to her. With a trembling hand, Eleanor reached for it. She felt its familiar weight, the cool leather, the faint scent of old paper. A sharp pang hit her heart. She traced the indentations where his hand had rested. It was more than numbers. It was a memory, a part of him. Her tears slowed. She held the ledger tightly, absorbing its strength. His lessons, his belief in her. He taught her to value integrity, to wield her talent, to protect what was right. A quiet resolve bloomed, pushing back despair. A fierce, quiet determination. She would not give up. Not for herself, but for her father, for his legacy. She would fight. The ledger felt heavy and reassuring. She would find the truth. She would expose Lady Beatrice. The worn leather of her father's ledger felt cool against Eleanor's trembling fingers. Each faded line, every precise numeral, held a silent echo of his voice, a whisper of the unwavering belief he had always placed in her. This was not merely a book of accounts. It was a testament to a love that scorn and cruelty could never extinguish. The tears, which had almost overwhelmed her, now dried on her cheeks, leaving a faint, salty residue. A quiet determination settled deep within her chest. She would not yield. Not now. Not ever. The following days became a blur of frantic, meticulous work. Eleanor spent every available moment immersed in the labyrinthine world of Lord Alistair's accounts. The secure room he had provided became her sanctuary, a small, quiet island in a sea of encroaching dread. The scent of old paper and lamp oil filled the air as she pored over ledgers, receipts, and bank statements, her brow furrowed in concentration. She moved with an almost frenetic energy, her nimble fingers flying across pages, making notes, cross-referencing figures with a precision born of years of quiet practice. She recalled her father's lessons, his gentle insistence on understanding the story behind the numbers. "Every penny tells a tale, Eleanor," he used to say, his kind eyes twinkling. "You must learn to listen to its whispers." And as she listened, she felt the subtle cadence of the estate's financial heartbeat, noticing when a beat skipped or a rhythm faltered. The initial discrepancies she had found now seemed like mere surface ripples hiding a treacherous undertow. Lord Alistair's quiet warning about a trusted figure echoed in her mind, adding a layer of urgency to her search. She sensed a pattern, a ghost in the machine, and her father's methods for detecting subtle fraud began to guide her like a compass. Her process was unique. While most auditors looked for large, obvious discrepancies, Eleanor sought the tiny, almost imperceptible deviations that, over time, would compound into something monstrous. She would jot down unusual supplier names, round figures appearing in odd places, or payments made to entities that seemed to have no clear purpose. She did not just see numbers, she saw the human hand behind them, the choices, the intentions. The quiet scratching of her quill against parchment was the only sound in the small room, a relentless rhythm of discovery. As the days turned into nights, a disturbing image began to form in her mind. Some of the names, some of the very specific types of transactions she noted in Blackwood Manor's books, stirred a faint, unsettling familiarity. A shiver ran down her spine. It was a recognition so subtle, so deeply buried, that it almost escaped her. These were not direct duplicates, not obvious copies, but rather echoes, like two different songs played in the same key by the same unseen musician. She thought of Oakwood, her own home, or what remained of it under Lady Beatrice's frivolous hand, the gradual, almost imperceptible decline of her father's estate. She had dismissed it as her stepmother's poor management, her penchant for extravagance. But what if it was more? What if the slow decay was not merely carelessness, but something far more sinister, far more deliberate? The possibility sent a cold dread through her veins. Could the same invisible hand be touching both estates? The thought made her breath catch in her throat. Eleanor began to compare the Blackwood ledgers with the fragmented memories she held of Oakwood's accounts. Her father had kept meticulous copies, a habit she had inherited. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact wording of a peculiar invoice, the signature on a payment authorization. It was a memory exercise she had practiced since childhood, a mental library of figures and facts. She found herself piecing together information, like scattered fragments of a broken vase. Then a name appeared in Lord Alistair's expenditure records that made her heart leap. It was a firm, a supplier of exotic silks and rare perfumes, one that Lady Beatrice had favored with excessive patronage at Oakwood. The amounts listed in Blackwood's books for this supplier were astronomical, completely disproportionate to the estate's needs. Lord Alistair was a man of practicality, not frivolous luxury. This was the first concrete thread. She pulled at it, meticulously tracing every transaction to that supplier, following the money as her father had taught her. The trail led to a small, obscure holding company, an entity registered to an address that turned out to be little more than a post office box, a dead end for anyone else. But Eleanor remembered her father's frustration with similar tactics. He had shown her how to search for the true beneficiary, the name hidden behind the facade. She spent a night sleeplessly, painstakingly cross-referencing names, addresses, and dates from Blackwood's documents. The breakthrough came with the dawn. A series of payments from the mysterious holding company, meant to look like legitimate business expenses, suddenly stood out. They were all made to a specific individual, a man named Arthur Finch. The name resonated with a chilling familiarity. Arthur Finch was not merely a clerk or a minor functionary. He was Lord Alistair's personal secretary, a man who had served the Blackwood family for decades, a figure thought to be utterly beyond reproach. The implication was a gut punch. Lord Alistair's trusted staff. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea followed by a surge of righteous anger. Finch. She remembered him from social gatherings at Oakwood, a quiet, almost invisible man who always seemed to be hovering near Lady Beatrice, exchanging brief, conspiratorial glances. At the time, Eleanor had dismissed it as a fleeting interaction, a shared social circle. Now it screamed collusion. Her hands shook as she pulled out the old, familiar ledger, her father's, from her small bag. There, nestled among his careful notes on crop yields and livestock inventories, were faint, barely visible entries about a Mr. Finch, always followed by a question mark or a small, worried annotation. Her father had suspected something. He had tried to warn her, even in his silence. He had seen the early threads of this insidious web. She found it then, a specific invoice from that same silk and perfume supplier, addressed to Oakwood Manor, but with an artificially inflated sum. The signature approving the payment was Lady Beatrice's, bold and unmistakable. But the underlying figures, the true cost, had been meticulously altered, a small, subtle forgery in the lower left corner. It was a technique of manipulation her father had once described to her in detail. Alter a single digit in the entire balance shifts. It was so skillfully done, only a very keen eye, specifically trained in the nuances of estate accounting, would ever spot it. This was the forged document. The interconnected transactions became blindingly clear. Finch, using his position of trust at Blackwood, had been diverting funds through the shell company, funneling inflated payments for fictitious services or goods. Lady Beatrice at Oakwood was doing the same, collaborating with Finch to siphon wealth from both estates. She was not merely complicit, she was an active participant, a willing co-conspirator. The funds would then be split, flowing into private accounts that neither manor should have been supporting. It explained the subtle decline of Oakwood and the growing disarray of Blackwood's finances. It was a systematic plunder. Eleanor worked through the night, cross-referencing every detail, building her case with unwavering precision. Each discovery felt like a fresh wound, a betrayal of her father's legacy, a confirmation of Lady Beatrice's boundless greed. She felt a burning ache behind her eyes, but no tears came. Only a cold, hard resolve. She had to expose them. For her father, for Lord Alistair, for justice. By the time the first sliver of dawn pierced through the curtains, Eleanor had laid out her evidence on the large oak table. A pile of ledgers, a series of highlighted invoices, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and the damning forged document itself. Her fingers traced the subtle alteration, a testament to the meticulous deceit. It was all there, undeniable, irrefutable. She went to Lord Alistair's study, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was already there, nursing a cup of tea, his expression weary. His gaze, usually so sharp, softened when he saw her, but then sharpened again, noticing the grim set of her jaw and the bundle of documents clutched in her hand. He offered her a seat, his voice low, filled with a quiet concern. "Eleanor," he began, "you look as though you have wrestled with a storm." She placed the documents on his desk, spreading them out with deliberate movements. The scent of old paper and the metallic tang of ink filled the air between them. Her voice, though soft, carried an unshakable conviction. "More than a storm, my lord, a viper's nest." She began to speak, her words precise and measured, laying bare the intricate web of deception. She started with the oversized payments to the silk supplier, then moved to the shell company, and finally to the name. "Arthur Finch, my lord." Lord Alistair's teacup clattered against the saucer, a sharp sound in the quiet room. His eyes, usually so composed, widened with a disbelieving shock that slowly contorted into a profound, chilling rage. He picked up the forged invoice, his gaze fixed on the subtle manipulation, then to the meticulous connections she had drawn, linking Finch to the mysterious holding company and back to the exorbitant payments. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. The betrayal was etched onto his face. "And Lady Beatrice," Eleanor continued, her voice unwavering, "she is not merely ignorant, my lord. She is intertwined in this. She signed this particular invoice." She pointed to the forged document, her finger trembling slightly. The funds siphoned from both estates, they ultimately benefited them both. Lord Alistair stared at the evidence, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The silence in the room was deafening, heavy with the weight of the monstrous truth. His eyes, now blazing with fury, slowly lifted to meet Eleanor's. The shock of betrayal, mixed with a chilling, incandescent rage, consumed his features. A cold wind seemed to sweep through the grand study at Blackwood Manor, chilling the very air as Lord Alistair stared at the documents Eleanor had presented. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he traced the forged signature, his keen gray eyes scanning the meticulous ledger entries once more. The betrayal was a bitter taste on his tongue, a poison seeping into the foundations of his trust. Eleanor watched him, her own heart a drum against her ribs, waiting for his verdict, for the confirmation that her suspicions were not just a desperate hope. The scent of old paper and polished wood filled the silence, heavy with the weight of the truth. She could feel the chill radiating from him, a raw anger barely contained. He slowly pushed the papers away, the faint rustle of parchment echoing in the hushed room. His gaze lifted, locking onto Eleanor's face, a complex mixture of fury and dawning respect in his eyes. "Mr. Davies," he finally said, his voice low and tight, each word clipped with barely suppressed rage. "My own steward, a man I trusted for 3 decades, a man whose family has served mine for generations." He shook his head again, a slow, deliberate movement. The betrayal ran deeper than mere finances. It was a wound to his very sense of order, a violation of the loyalty he valued above all else. Eleanor felt a wave of empathy for him, recognizing the hollow ache of trust broken. Her father had once spoken of such treachery as the most insidious of all poisons, slowly corrupting everything it touched. "The evidence is irrefutable, Lord Alistair," Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm, a strength she had not possessed weeks ago. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the polished oak desk, a grounding sensation amidst the storm. The double-entry ledger showed the discrepancies, then the falsified invoices, and finally this document. It was designed to look like a simple clerical error, but the pattern, when seen across both estates, reveals its true intent. She remembered the countless hours spent poring over the numbers, the late nights, the growing dread in her stomach as the pieces clicked into place. This was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of theft. Lord Alistair closed his eyes for a moment, a deep sigh escaping him, heavy with disappointment. When he opened them, the anger had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. "You have done more than merely audit my accounts, Miss Vance," he acknowledged, his voice now steady. "You have uncovered a viper in my own nest, and by extension, one that threatens your inheritance as well." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "This cannot stand. This injustice, this calculated deceit, must be brought to light, not only for my estate, but for yours, for your father's memory." He reached across the desk, his hand resting on her father's ledger, a silent gesture of solidarity. Eleanor felt a surge of triumph, a quiet exhilaration she had never known. This was it, the turning point. Her work, her father's teachings, were finally recognized, finally wielding the power they deserved. Lady Beatrice was complicit, Eleanor reminded him, her voice holding an edge he hadn't heard before. "She benefited directly from these schemes. She orchestrated my removal so she could have free rein." The image of her stepmother's condescending smile, her dismissive wave, flashed in Eleanor's mind, fueling a renewed fire. This was not just about justice, it was about reclamation. "Indeed," Lord Alistair agreed, nodding slowly. "She used your alleged incapacity as a shield, while she plundered both our houses." He stood, walking to the large window overlooking the manicured gardens, his hands clasped behind his back. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, but inside a new dawn of purpose was breaking. "We must be strategic. Public exposure, yes, but meticulously planned. We need to gather every thread, every receipt, every whisper, and weave them into an undeniable tapestry of truth." He turned back to her, a glint in his gray eyes. "How do we begin, Miss Vance? What is our first move?" Eleanor rose, walking toward the large oak desk that dominated the room, her thoughts racing, connecting various pieces of information. The feel of the smooth, cool wood beneath her fingertips was grounding. "We must ensure all the evidence is absolutely secure first," she began, her voice steady, "beyond their ability to destroy or discredit it. Every ledger, every invoice, every scrap of paper that points to their deception." She thought of the hidden compartments in her father's old desk at Oakwood, places where important documents had been stored safely from prying eyes. Lord Alastair's study offered similar secret nooks. She glanced at the heavy leather-bound books on the shelves, their spines holding countless stories of past transactions. Lord Alastair listened intently, a slight smile playing on his lips, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "A wise first step, Miss Vance. Mr. Davies has a key to the estate office, but not, I suspect, to the hidden safe in my personal chambers." He walked back to the desk, pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden box. "This contains the true master keys, known only to the master of Blackwood and his most trusted confidant, which it appears you have become." The words, spoken so simply, sent a warmth through Eleanor, a validation that resonated deep within her soul. The scent of beeswax from the polished furniture mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of old books, creating an atmosphere of serious, shared purpose. "Then we need to prepare a compelling narrative," Eleanor continued, ignoring the blush that threatened to rise. Her mind was too engaged, too focused on the task at hand. "Lady Beatrice has always relied on public perception, on painting me as an incapable fool. We must use her own tactics against her, but with truth as our weapon." She remembered the sting of her stepmother's words, the constant, insidious undermining. Now those memories were not debilitating, but galvanizing. They were fuel. "Precisely," Lord Alistair agreed, his fingers drumming lightly on the tabletop. "We need to set a stage where the truth can be revealed without question, before an audience that matters." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "A significant social gathering, perhaps. One where Lady Beatrice expects to shine, to further cement her position." A plan began to coalesce in his mind, a grand tableau of revelation. The air in the room seemed to crackle with an unspoken energy, the excitement of a strategic battle about to unfold. Eleanor's heart beat a little faster. This was not just a financial audit, it was a carefully constructed play, with her as the unexpected protagonist. She felt a strange thrill, a sense of power she had never imagined possessing. The weight of years of humiliation, of being dismissed and diminished, was slowly lifting, replaced by a lightness, a fierce, quiet confidence. "We need to consider her reactions," Eleanor added, her gaze sharp. "She will deny everything, attempt to discredit me. She will employ every falsehood she knows. And we shall be ready for each one," Lord Alistair assured her, his voice firm. "We will have not only the ledgers, but also sworn statements, cross-reference transactions, in a clear, concise presentation that even the most biased observer cannot ignore." He envisioned the scene, the faces of the assembled gentry, their shock, their dawning understanding. This would be a reckoning. He thought of Mr. Davies, his once trusted steward, and felt a cold, hard ache in his chest. Betrayal from within was always the most painful. They spent hours that day meticulously mapping out each step. They discussed the timing, the guest list, the specific documents to be presented, the sequence of revelations. Eleanor's analytical mind, trained by her father in the intricate dance of numbers and logic, proved invaluable. She anticipated Lady Beatrice's arguments, pinpointed weaknesses in their own case, and suggested countermeasures. Lord Alistair was not merely impressed, he was deeply moved by her intellectual prowess and her unwavering commitment to justice. The lamp on the desk cast a warm glow, pushing back the encroaching evening shadows, a beacon of their shared purpose. Eleanor felt her blood sing with purpose. The past few weeks had been a crucible, forging her into something new, something stronger. The girl who had once cowered under Lady Beatrice's sharp tongue was gone, replaced by a woman with a clear vision and an unshakable resolve. Her father's spirit, she felt, was guiding her, whispering encouragement from the worn pages of his ledger, which now lay open before them. The smell of his old pipe tobacco, a phantom scent, seemed to fill her nostrils, a comforting presence. We must also consider the legal ramifications, Lord Alistair stated, bringing them back to the pragmatic. My solicitor, Mr. Thompson, is a man of unimpeachable integrity. He will need to be fully apprised, but only when the time is absolutely right. He looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes softening. This will be a difficult path, Miss Vance. Lady Beatrice will not surrender easily. She will fight with the desperation of a cornered animal. Eleanor met his gaze, her own eyes steady and clear. The apprehension was still there, a faint tremor in the pit of her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. The years of quiet suffering, the countless slights, the blatant attempts to steal her inheritance and her identity, all coalesced into a potent wellspring of courage. I am ready, Lord Alistair, she said, her voice devoid of hesitation. I have waited a very long time for this. The sound of her own voice, firm and resolute, surprised even her. It was the voice of the woman she was becoming. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, painting stripes of gold across the polished floorboards. The study, once a place of quiet contemplation for Lord Alistair, now hummed with the energy of a joint venture, a conspiracy for truth. Eleanor outlined the specific points of financial manipulation she had identified at Oakwood, the subtle diversions of funds, the inflated invoices, the phantom estate improvements. Each detail was a nail in Lady Beatrice's coffin of deceit. She has been bleeding your estate dry, Miss Vance, Lord Alistair observed, his jaw tightening, just as she attempted to bleed mine. This connection is undeniable, a pattern too distinct to be coincidence. He saw the glint of determination in Eleanor's eyes, the set of her chin, the delicate features he had first observed, often downcast and shadowed by sorrow, now held a fierce, unyielding light. They moved on to the specifics of the confrontation. Lord Alistair proposed hosting a grand ball, an event that would draw all the necessary figures of society, including Lady Beatrice, who would undoubtedly attend, eager to display her ill-gotten gains. It must be a setting where she feels most secure, he explained, most untouchable. That is when the fall will be most dramatic, most undeniable. The thought sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine, but it was not a shiver of fear. It was the thrill of the impending battle. Eleanor thought about the carefully chosen words, the subtle implications she would use, mirroring her stepmother's own tactics, but turning them to expose the truth. She would speak not with anger, but with cold, hard facts, letting the numbers tell their own damning story. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind. Numbers do not lie, Eleanor. They only reveal what is already true. The weight of his ledger, lying beside her, felt less like a burden and more like a shield, a powerful weapon. We will need to ensure that Mr. Davies is present as well, Eleanor suggested, her thoughts meticulous. He is complicit, and his reaction will be telling. Perhaps even a confession could be extracted under the right pressure. She imagined the look on her stepmother's face when her carefully constructed world began to crumble. The thought, while chilling, also brought a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice, after all, was a dish best served with precision. Lord Alistair nodded, approving her strategic thinking. Indeed, we will ensure both are present, perhaps even positioned in close proximity, so they might witness each other's downfall. The air in the room grew heavy with the unspoken promise of retribution, of long-awaited justice. Eleanor felt a knot of tension she had carried for years begin to loosen, a glimmer of relief piercing through the layers of her apprehension. The plan was audacious, intricate, and fraught with risk, but it was also meticulously crafted, built on Eleanor's undeniable evidence and Lord Alistair's unwavering support. They went over each detail again, testing it, refining it, ensuring no loophole remained. The smell of ink and parchment filled the air as they made notes, marking key points, creating a timeline for the grand revelation. The prospect of facing Lady Beatrice, once a source of paralyzing fear, now ignited a cold, burning resolve within Eleanor. She imagined the faces of the people who had always dismissed her, the whispers that had followed her, the pitying glances. Soon they would see. Soon they would know the truth. This was her chance, not just to reclaim her inheritance, but to reclaim her very identity. She was no longer just her father's daughter or Lady Beatrice's scorned stepdaughter. She was Eleanor Vance, a woman of intellect, integrity, and formidable will. Her locket, hidden beneath her simple dress, felt warm against her skin, a constant reminder of the legacy she fought to uphold. The hours passed quickly, merging into the soft glow of the evening. When they finally stood, the room was steeped in twilight, illuminated only by the faint silver light filtering through the windows and the single lamp on the desk. They had charted a course, dangerous yet necessary, towards the truth. Eleanor looked at Lord Alistair, a man who had seen past the facade, who had recognized her true worth when no one else would. A profound gratitude swelled within her. Lady Beatrice will finally face justice, Lord Alistair, Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong, a promise echoing in the quiet room. Her posture was straight, her chin held high, radiating a quiet power. The words were not a threat, but a statement of immutable fact, born of conviction and irrefutable proof. She extended her hand, her grip firm and steady. Lord Alistair took it, his strong fingers closing around hers. His gaze, full of respect and a deep, unspoken understanding, met hers. The shared glance was a silent pact, a profound alliance forged in the crucible of shared purpose and impending justice. The air in Blackwood Manor's grand ballroom hung thick with a peculiar tension, heavier than the velvet drapes or the scent of polished wood. Crystal chandeliers cast 1,000 shimmering fragments of light across the expectant faces gathered below. Eleanor stood beside Lord Alistair, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs, steady yet powerful. She could feel the stares, 100 eyes dissecting her simple gown, her quiet presence. Every face present held a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment, a society poised on the edge of a precipice. Lord Alistair stepped forward, his voice a calm, resonant tide in the hushed room. He spoke of the importance of truth, the sanctity of trust, and the painful necessity of confronting difficult realities. He did not name names, but every eye, including Eleanor's own, flickered towards Lady Beatrice, who stood rigid nearby. Her smile, usually so practiced, seemed fixed, a fragile mask barely concealing a rising unease. When Lord Alistair gestured towards Eleanor, a wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Eleanor took a deep breath, the scent of expensive perfume and old anxieties filling her lungs. She walked to the small table placed at the center of the room, her father's leather-bound ledger clutched firmly in her hands. The worn cover felt familiar, a solid anchor against the swirling uncertainty within her. This was the moment she had prepared for, the culmination of years of quiet suffering and diligent, secret work. Her gaze swept over the faces, lingering for a fraction on Lady Beatrice, whose eyes, usually so dismissive, now held a glint of apprehension. "Good evening," Eleanor began, her voice soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the room. She felt a tremor in her hands, but her resolve held firm. "My father, bless his memory, taught me much about the careful stewardship of an estate. He believed that numbers, when honestly recorded, tell a story." She opened the ledger, its pages rustling like dry autumn leaves. A hush fell over the assembly, the polite chatter dying away completely. She began to speak of Blackwood Manor's accounts, detailing specific entries and discrepancies that Lord Alistair had already acknowledged to his closest associates. Her words were precise, unhurried, laying out a pattern of deliberate misdirection and financial manipulation. She referenced dates, sums, and the specific, unusual methods used to obscure the true flow of funds. The guests listened, their initial skepticism slowly giving way to a dawning comprehension. She pointed to a particular page in the ledger, inviting those nearby to observe the meticulous, precise figures that revealed a hidden truth. "This entry, for example, on the 23rd of June last year," Eleanor stated, her finger tracing a line on the page, "shows a payment for estate repairs. Yet, when cross-referenced with the actual work orders and material receipts, a significant portion of that sum never reached the intended suppliers." She looked up, her gaze steady, meeting the eyes of Mr. Davies, Lord Alistair's steward, who now stood pale and rigid amongst the crowd, his usual composed demeanor shattered. His face was a roadmap of shock and dawning horror. Lady Beatrice, her face a storm of fury and disbelief, attempted to interject. "This is ridiculous." My dear Eleanor, you know nothing of such complex matters. You were always so easily confused by simple numbers. How could you possibly understand these intricate accounts? Her voice, usually so saccharine, now held a sharp, desperate edge. She made a dismissive gesture with her hand, attempting to sweep away Eleanor's words like dust. Eleanor did not flinch. Perhaps, she conceded, her tone even, but my father taught me to be thorough. And the numbers, Lady Beatrice, speak for themselves. She continued, laying out more examples, each one a nail in the coffin of the carefully constructed deception. She explained how funds earmarked for estate improvements were diverted, how ghost employees were paid, and how invoices were inflated. The weight of her father's ledger, its familiar scent of old paper and leather, gave her strength. The murmurs returned, louder this time, no longer of skepticism, but of shock and growing understanding. Lord Alastair watched, a silent sentinel, his steady presence a palpable support. He occasionally offered a brief, confirming nod, reinforcing Eleanor's every word. She then introduced the evidence connecting these financial manipulations at Blackwood Manor to similar, albeit more subtle, discrepancies at Oakwood Manor. These patterns, Eleanor explained, holding up a collection of documents, are not coincidental. They reveal a coordinated effort, a network of deceit that reaches across both estates. She presented a forged document, a payment order with a falsified signature, meticulously pointing out the inconsistencies in the handwriting. This, I believe, connects directly to a series of transactions I uncovered in Oakwood's own books. Lady Beatrice's face contorted. You are lying. You are a simple girl, a fool. You know nothing of our affairs. This is a cruel fabrication, a slander against my good name. Her voice rose, shrill with panic, threatening to break the decorum of the room. She took a step forward, as if to physically stop Eleanor. But Lord Alastair subtly shifted, blocking her path with his imposing figure. Eleanor remained calm, her gaze unwavering. The evidence suggests otherwise, Lady Beatrice. She then revealed the heart of her findings, a series of payments from Blackwood's accounts, routed through a shell company, ultimately benefiting an account directly controlled by Lady Beatrice herself. She displayed bank statements, meticulously cross-referenced and annotated. The numbers were stark, undeniable. Here, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, is a transfer of £5,000. Purported purpose? Acquisition of rare timber. Actual destination, a private account listed under the name of B.B. Vance, traceable directly to Lady Beatrice's personal holdings. Her eyes met her stepmother's, a lifetime of suppressed pain and humiliation, now channeled into this quiet, devastating truth. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with the weight of revelation. Lady Beatrice's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her lips trembled. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair seemed to lose its sheen. Impossible, she whispered, her voice barely audible, though the word was swallowed by the sudden collective gasp of the assembled guests. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, but found none. Only judgment and cold understanding met her gaze. Eleanor pressed on, her voice imbued with a quiet power that resonated through the shocked silence. She detailed how Lady Beatrice had systematically devalued Oakwood Manor, creating a false impression of mismanagement to justify her own lavish spending and to secure control of the inheritance. She explained how funds intended for the care of the estate's tenants were diverted, leading to hardship and neglect. Every word was a hammer blow, each piece of evidence a fresh wound. My father's legacy, Eleanor stated, her voice thick with emotion, but her composure still holding, was one of integrity and care. These actions, Lady Beatrice, are a betrayal of everything he stood for. She held up another document, a letter in Lady Beatrice's own hand, authorizing a payment to a fictitious supplier, a payment that never reached its stated destination. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Faces turned from Eleanor to Lady Beatrice, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and a dawning understanding. The whispers grew like a rising tide. Lady Beatrice's face was a mask of rapidly shifting emotions: fury, disbelief, terror. Her carefully cultivated image of grace and refinement disintegrated before their eyes. She tried to speak, but only a choked sound escaped her throat. Eleanor closed her father's ledger with a soft thud, the sound echoing in the silence. She had laid bare the truth, meticulously and without flourish. The weight of her testimony, backed by irrefutable proof, hung heavy in the air. Lady Beatrice stared at her, her eyes wide and wild, no longer seeing a simple girl, but an avenging angel, relentless and true. This, Eleanor concluded, her voice now carrying a note of profound finality, is the story the numbers tell. Lady Beatrice's body suddenly sagged, her meticulously tailored gown seeming to crumple around her, her eyes, once so full of contempt, now swam with a terrifying mix of rage and utter despair. A guttural cry escaped her, a sound more animal than human, as if all the air had been violently forced from her lungs. She reached out, grasping for a nearby chair, her fingers clawing at the polished wood as if seeking an anchor in her collapsing world. Her schemes, so carefully woven, lay in tatters, exposed in ruin. She gasped, a ragged, broken sound, and then she fell. Not with a dramatic flourish, but rather as if her bare bones had dissolved, collapsing onto the Persian rug in a heap of silk and shame. The entire room erupted into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. All eyes, once fixed on the dramatic unveiling, now turned to the fallen figure, then back to Eleanor. The once humiliated girl now stood tall, her quiet strength shining through the case, bathed in the sudden, newfound awe and respect of a society that had, just moments before, scorned her very existence. The gasp that followed Lady Beatrice's collapse echoed for days through the halls of London society. A silence, heavy and uncomfortable, fell upon the Blackwood ballroom, broken only by the hurried whispers of servants and the rustle of gowns. The intricate web of deceit had unraveled before everyone, leaving her exposed and ruined. Eleanor watched, a strange calm settling over her, as the once commanding figure of her stepmother was gently but firmly escorted away. The scent of fear, sharp and metallic, seemed to cling to Lady Beatrice's retreating form. News traveled with astonishing speed through the city, carried on the wings of scandal and righteous indignation. The legal proceedings were swift, almost mercifully so, for Eleanor. Lord Alistair Blackwood's influence proved invaluable, his quiet authority cutting through any lingering doubt. The evidence Eleanor had meticulously gathered spoke for itself, laid bare in the cold, clear light of the courtroom. Lady Beatrice was stripped of all control over the Vance estate, her assets seized to repay the debts she had secretly incurred and the funds she had embezzled. Her social standing evaporated like morning mist, leaving her with nothing but the bitter taste of public disgrace and financial ruin. Eleanor felt a strange pang, not of pity, but of a profound exhaustion, the burden of years finally lifting from her shoulders. She ran a hand over the rough wooden railing in the courtroom, feeling its solid, unyielding truth. With the legal battle settled, Eleanor turned her gaze towards Oakwood Manor. She approached its gates with a sense of trepidation, as if returning to a ghost. The once vibrant gardens were overgrown, choked with weeds that climbed like grasping fingers up the ancient stone walls. Inside, dust motes danced in the sparse sunlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating a scene of quiet decay. The grand halls, once filled with her father's laughter, now smelled of neglect and stale air, a faint, lingering scent of expensive, unused perfume. Each creak of the floorboards echoed with memories, both cherished and painful. Her fingers brushed against a velvet curtain, feeling the grime of indifference. Lord Alistair stood by her side, a silent, unwavering presence. He walked through the manor with her, his keen gray eyes missing nothing, yet offering only support, never judgment. He listened as Eleanor spoke of her father's vision for the estate, of the meticulous ledgers that detailed every tree planted, every harvest gathered. His presence was a quiet anchor in the whirlwind of her emotions. She felt a warmth spread through her chest each time he offered a practical suggestion, his voice low and steady. Eleanor wasted no time. She plunged into the task of restoration with a fierce, quiet determination. She hired skilled gardeners to reclaim the neglected grounds, their shovels biting into the soil with a satisfying crunch. Painters brought fresh life to faded walls, their brushes whispering over the surfaces. Carpenters repaired creaking doors and loose floorboards, filling the manor with the wholesome scent of fresh-cut wood. Eleanor herself spent hours poring over her father's old ledgers, meticulously comparing past expenditures with current needs. She felt the cool, smooth paper beneath her fingertips, tracing his familiar script. The heavy, polished oak of her father's study desk, once a sanctuary, now became her command center. She discovered more discrepancies, more subtle sabotages orchestrated by Lady Beatrice, but they no longer held power over her. Each problem solved, each ledger balanced, brought a surge of quiet triumph. The manor slowly began to breathe again, its grand bones regaining their former strength. The rich scent of beeswax and lemon polish replaced the stale air. The sound of cheerful industry filled the days, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had once reigned. Eleanor felt a profound connection to the work, a way of honoring her father's legacy not just in spirit, but in tangible, thriving reality. As Oakwood Manor began to flourish, Eleanor felt a growing desire to share the knowledge that had saved her. She remembered the countless hours spent in the hidden study, the worn leather of her father's ledger, a constant companion. She thought of other young women, perhaps scorned or underestimated, who possessed untapped potential. This thought sparked an idea, a bright ember in her heart. She decided to establish a foundation in her father's name. The Vance Legacy Foundation became a beacon of opportunity. Dedicated to educating young women in practical skills, mathematics, and estate management, it offered a chance for them to learn what Eleanor had learned in secret. The old, dusty library at Oakwood Manor was transformed into bustling classrooms filled with the eager murmurs of students. Eleanor herself taught some of the classes, her voice soft but clear as she explained complex calculations, the scent of old books and new parchment filling the air. She watched their faces light up with understanding, a deep satisfaction blooming within her. She wanted no other girl to face the same struggles, to feel the same crushing weight of being told she was too simple to read, too ignorant to manage. The warmth of their shared ambition was palpable. Her friendship with Lord Alistair deepened into something profound and unspoken. He often visited Oakwood Manor, ostensibly to discuss estate matters, but their conversations often drifted beyond balance sheets and harvest yields. They would sit in the newly restored drawing room, the gentle warmth of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on their faces, or walk through the blossoming gardens, the scent of roses heavy in the air. He listened intently as she spoke of her dreams for the foundation, his keen gray eyes reflecting a quiet admiration. There were moments, fleeting but potent, when their gazes would meet and hold, and a silent understanding would pass between them. A slight touch of his hand as he handed her a document, a shared smile over a particularly clever solution to a problem, a quiet sigh of contentment as they watched the sunset paint the sky over the flourishing estate. These were the heart-pounding moments, the unspoken words, the deep emotional bond that transcended mere partnership. Eleanor felt a comforting presence in his company, a profound sense of being truly seen and valued. The world felt safer, brighter when he was near. One afternoon, Eleanor stood on the sun-drenched balcony of Oakwood Manor. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees that dotted the landscape, a soft, whispering sound. Below, the gardens bloomed in vibrant hues, meticulously cared for and flourishing. The fields stretched green and fertile, promising abundant harvests. The manor itself stood proud and stately, its windows gleaming, a testament to resilience and renewal. She felt the warm stone of the balustrade beneath her hands, solid and reassuring. A gentle, confident smile graced her lips. The journey had been long, marked by tears, pain, and a fierce, quiet determination. But now, Oakwood Manor was truly her own, a reflection of her strength and her father's enduring legacy. She felt a profound peace settle in her heart, a quiet strength that had been hard-won. The future stretched before her, not as a daunting unknown, but as a canvas she could paint with her own purpose. This was a new and empowered chapter of her life, beautifully unfolding. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it.